Welcome to the public hearing for the inquiry into budget estimates 2021-2022. Before I commence, I would like to acknowledge the Gadigal people who are the traditional custodians of this land. I would also like to pay respect to the elders past, present and emerging of the Eora Nation and extend that respect to other Aboriginals present. I welcome Minister Tudehope and accompanying officials to this hearing. Today the committee will examine the proposed expenditure for the portfolios of finance and small business. Before we commence, I'd like to make some brief comments about the procedures for today's hearing. Today's proceedings are being broadcast live from Parliament's website, and a transcript will be placed on the committee's website once it becomes available. In accordance with the broadcasting guidelines, media representatives are reminded that they must take responsibility for what they publish about the committee's proceedings. All witnesses in budget estimates have a right to procedural fairness according to the Procedural Fairness Resolution adopted by the House in 2018. There may be some questions that a witness could only answer if they had more time or with certain documents to hand. In these circumstances, witnesses are advised that they can take a question on notice and provide an answer within 21 days. If witnesses wish to hand up documents, they should do so through the committee staff. Minister, I remind you and the officers accompanying you that you are free to pass notes and refer directly to your advisors seated at the table behind you. In terms of the audibility of the hearing today, we have witnesses in person and via a video conference. Can I ask that committee members clearly identify who questions are directed to, well, yes, for online purposes, and could people please state their name when they begin speaking for Hansard? Could everyone please mute their microphones when they are not speaking? Finally, could everyone please turn their mobile phones to silent for the duration of the hearing? We'll now swear in our witnesses. All witnesses will be sworn prior to giving evidence. Minister, I remind you that you do not need to be sworn as you've already sworn an oath to your office as a Member of Parliament. But for the other witnesses, I ask that each of you in turn state your full name, your position, title and agency and swear either an oath or affirmation. The words of both the oath and the affirmation are on the cards or should have been sent to you. We might start with you, Mr Lamont.
Chris Lamont, New South Wales Small Business Commissioner. I swear that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help me God.
Gadiel.
Michael Gadiel, Executive Director, Economic Strategy of New South Wales Treasury. I solemnly and sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Mr Gardner.
Philip Gardner, Deputy Secretary of Commercial and Procurement, New South Wales Treasury. I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Mr Johnston.
Scott Johnston, Chief Commissioner of State Revenue and Commissioner of Fines Administration. I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. And Mr Smythe.
Colin Smythe, Commissioner of State Revenue, Revenue New South Wales. I swear that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help me God.
Thank you. Today's hearing will be conducted from 2 p.m. to 5:15 with the Minister and departmental witnesses with questions from the opposition and crossbench members only. If required, an additional 15 minutes is allocated at the end of the session for government questions. As there's no provision for any witness to make an opening statement before the committee commences questioning, we will begin with questions from the opposition.
Thank you, Chair, and greetings to you, Minister. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. And equally, can I say at the outset, greetings to your officials, and can I just provide certainly the opposition's thanks to the respective officials at the Small Business Commissioner's Office, the Treasury and the Revenue, I understand, have helped manage a lot of assistance to businesses in the last 16 weeks. And just to your staff, we just do want to place on our record our appreciation for their efforts as well. But on that, Minister, you agree with me that the 16-week lockdown did have a devastating impact on the state's small and medium enterprises?
Not to agree, Daniel.
And you agree with me that the effects were particularly acute in regional New South Wales compared to their expectations as to what otherwise would have happened?
Oh, well, there's a lot of qualifiers in relation to that. I have to say that the pandemic has been felt across the state in a very significant way. It may have had different impacts on different areas, but I would be loath to say it was more impactful in one area than another. I recognise that it does have impacts on regional areas.
But we do agree at least that for the LGAs of concern, it had a disproportionate and heavy impact on them and small and medium enterprises in those LGAs of concern.
I certainly think that the public health orders, so far as they were directed at local government areas of concern, clearly impacted on those local government areas more significantly, and there were terms of those public health orders which didn't apply to other areas, which certainly would have had a significant impact on those areas.
Indeed, and you are aware of the analysis that's been produced by Accenture and others who say that in those LGAs of concern, those small businesses suffered downturns akin to 70% of their revenue?
Well, I don't necessarily have access to the Accenture material.
But you saw those reports?
I haven't seen the reports.
Okay, well, has Treasury given you advice as to, or anyone else given you any advice as to what the specific impacts on small business in LGAs of concern were?
Well, I get regular updates from the Small Business Commissioner in terms of impacts on small business. So to the extent that you're asking me to see identify, and I think that potentially the Small Business Commissioner is regularly conducting surveys of impacts.
We'll get to that. But can I just ask you, and this, you might wish to answer this particular question, Minister, what additional initiatives is the government considering to help these small and medium enterprises across New South Wales, but specifically in the LGAs of concern, to get back on their feet? Additional initiatives that is the government currently considering?
Well, you asked me that in the House, that same question.
Fair warning, therefore,
fair
has
warning.
been given to you, Minister.
And I think I don't deviate necessarily from the answer that I gave in the House. Certainly the attitude of the government to assisting businesses in the impacted areas is enhanced by the West Invest investment, which is going to be a series of investments in opportunities for infrastructure development in Western Sydney. But let me just say this.
Just to channel the answer.
Let me just say this
just
in
for
relation
LGA,
to...
the question was...
Just let me finish. Just let me finish, Daniel. Let me finish. Let me finish.
Both of you, so you need to, we'll allow you to answer the question, but we need one person at a time because Hansard cannot capture it when two people are speaking.
But it is an important question. You should hear me out on this. And it's part of the answer which I gave in the House, is that this is a government which never tires of providing assistance to small business. And whether it's through voucher systems that we've identified or infrastructure development that we've identified, all of that is an opportunity for investment in small business. Now, you might say, well, there was a particular LGA which missed out or whatever from that, but it fails to take into account, or your analysis fails to take into account, that every strategy of this government is directed at providing support for small business.
I appreciate that, but you're responding to a question I haven't asked and a statement that I haven't made. Literally, the question I asked you was, are you considering any specific additional initiatives to small, medium enterprises in LGAs of concern? And I'm inferring from your answer that there is none being contemplated specifically for those LGAs of concern.
No, that's a wrong inference.
Okay, then...
That is a wrong inference.
Take us through it, Minister.
Then can you just tell us then, if it's incorrect, what additional programs of support for small and medium enterprises in LGAs of concern is the government currently considering?
Well, and I answered that by virtue of the fact that I have indicated that the government is committed to infrastructure investment by way of West Invest. I've indicated to you that all initiatives taken by the government are in fact investment in small businesses wherever you are.
Minister, you are aware that West Invest doesn't cover all local government areas of concern?
Well, it may not cover all local government areas of concern. Yes, I agree with that.
Right.
Which ones do you want to identify?
Yeah, here's two.
Bayside.
Bayside.
There's one.
George's River is the other one that we would be very interested in. Those two especially, they have the thread that's been excluded. It would be really interesting. same question for them, right? Just let's talk about those specific two LGAs. Given that they can't access West Invest, what additional initiatives for those small and medium enterprises in those two particular LGAs is the government now considering?
What I would say to you is the primary responsibility of government is to identify whole of state analysis how we can assist small businesses. And can I just say this to you? Is part of the issue which you have is this. Is the lifting of restrictions of itself, the stimulus to the economy generally, is an opportunity for opening up the whole of businesses throughout New South Wales and Sydney and those impacted areas in particular. What the line of questioning seeks to develop is that there aren't identifiable programs to assist a particular business. What I would suggest to you is...
They're giving you the invitation to just
finish the sentence, Daniel.
As well, but can I just ask, I accept that the Minister needs to finish his sentence, but the Minister actually has to answer the question he's asked, not the question he anticipates I'm asking.
Or wish I was asking.
I'm sure
the question that I was asking specifically, just to return you to some direct relevance, Minister, is are you considering any additional initiatives for those two LGAs?
To which I would answer, which I did before previously, that we never stop considering.
Right. Thank you. I appreciate your answer. Let's turn to what you said about West Invest. How much of West Invest money will be spent with small, medium enterprises?
Well, I'm not directly responsible for making those decisions, and I'm sure you will ask Minister Ayres in relation to that, which you already have.
I did. Yeah. Minister Ayres says he's not responsible for West Invest either. Yeah. So it's a bit of a mystery as to who precisely is the Minister of Carriage, but you're the one who nominated West Invest as a small and medium enterprise recovery strategy. Hence, I'm asking you, how much of the $5 billion is reserved to be spent with small and medium enterprises?
It's a fallacious question in many respects, and you should know that, Daniel.
Minister, you should know
to debate the question.
Yeah, well, you're not entitled to debate the question.
In that case, the premise of the question, the premise of the...
Very early on in proceedings.
I might just call a point of order.
It's on him. I can anticipate the point of order. I just want to... Can we just... It's very early.
This is not allowed to debate the question.
Which is what I'm about to say. So
I reject the premise of the question.
Sorry, Minister. You can reject the premise as part of your answer, but you can't debate the question. And we really need one person to speak at a time.
Just to be clear, Minister, you're rejecting the premise of a question which arises from your answer that says you're spending West Invest to help small businesses. Literally the only question I'm asking, Minister. Let me finish. But really, just let me finish.
Don't misrepresent me, though,
Minister.
Seriously, guys, we have a few hours to go. We need to just have one person speaking at a time.
Because that's not what I said.
Minister, okay, well then let me ask you. I'll ask you this. Okay. Of the $5 billion, how much of it is to be earmarked to be spent with small and medium enterprises?
Can I suggest to you that if you properly interpret the investment of money in infrastructure in Western Sydney, all of it is an investment in small business.
Yes, but how much of this
that's the answer.
And I appreciate that answer.
All of it is an investment in small business.
Minister. If all of it is there for small business, how much of it must be procured from small and medium enterprises?
Do you want to clarify what that question means?
You're the Minister who covers procurement policy, yes?
Yeah.
You have in previous programs identified certain targets for procurement of, say, for example, bushfire funds and other recovery funds that have to be spent with small and medium enterprises, you recall?
Absolutely.
You recall me asking you questions about whether or not you were meeting those targets?
In respect of bushfire grants?
On earlier programs?
Yep.
Therefore, has a procurement target for West Invest been set for small and medium enterprises?
Well, it's the best. Mr. Gardner might have an answer to that. Certainly, in terms of the delivery of that policy, I don't specifically say that.
Perhaps we can hear from Mr. Gardner about whether a specific target has been set.
Mr. Mookie, I haven't been involved in the development or speccing of West Invest, so I'd have to refer that to other Treasury colleagues.
I appreciate that, Mr. Gardner, which is, I accept you weren't, and we've had identified the Deputy Secretary who is, so it's a very fair answer. But given you are the Small Business Minister,
yep.
Have you said to the Treasurer that we should be reserving a certain proportion of this to be procured with small and medium enterprises?
And the general position which you consistently fail to acknowledge is that every investment in infrastructure by this government is an investment in small business.
Minister, that wasn't my question. My question was, have you had a conversation with the Treasurer and said to him that we need to reserve a certain proportion of this money to be procured from small and medium enterprises?
Well, you may have missed the fact that we made announcements about Dine and Discover vouchers and Dine and Rediscover vouchers. We have made
You've got 15 minutes. You've got 15 minutes.
Are you suggesting that the Dine and Discover is being funded from Westinvest?
I'm not saying that.
Then therefore, let's answer the question.
Point of order.
Okay, we really, I'm going to...
Could I make the point of order first? I understand that you're no doubt about to, but my point is simply this, and I guess I'm backing you up, Madam Chair. This is not working. There has to be, from both of you, there has to be a question then an answer, and it's not working otherwise, and it's not working for Hansard. It's really difficult for them, and they've had a tough enough year already. So for them, I ask, can we slow it down a little? That's my point of order, Madam Chair.
I uphold the point of order and the enthusiasm by which it was made. Please, a question followed by an answer. Minister, that includes you. You have to hear the question, and we're going to have a robust proceedings here, clearly. That's okay, but question followed by answer, followed by question, etc.
Madam Chair, I'm sure it works both ways.
So therefore, here's my question. I look forward to your answer, Minister. Have you had a conversation with the Treasury Secretary or the Treasurer or anyone really at all about reserving some of the Westinvest money for small and medium to be procured directly from small and medium enterprises?
And I repeat my answer to you, which you failed to understand or accept, and consistently failed to understand or accept, that all money invested by way of a West investment strategy ipso facto supports small business.
Okay. How many small businesses have closed in the lockdown LGAs during the 16-week? Have we got any indication or any data from either the Small Business Commission or from the Treasury?
Well, I'll perhaps ask the Small Business Commissioner where he has that data.
Mr Mookie, I don't have those figures. I'd hesitate to provide an answer because it would be delayed anyway, and there is a bit of a delay in terms of the insolvency data that is produced. We have been quite, I guess, buoyed by the fact that insolvencies have been relatively low to date. We keep an eye on that figure, but they have been relatively low.
Yes, I appreciate that, Commissioner. And do you have expectations as to what you're expecting and when you expect the peak to be?
Look, I wouldn't want to give you a projection on that. It's space that I'm unfamiliar with, but we'll keep a close eye on it.
Well, that's helpful, but perhaps Treasury can give us some insight on that, either to you, Mr Gadiel, or to Mr Gardner, however you see fit, through you, Minister, of course. Has Treasury prepared any expectations as to how many small businesses it expects to close as a result of the 16-week health-required shutdown?
There isn't any contemporaneous published data on business closures, especially not by LGA. We have relied on real-time data through the lockdown, such as mobility data and credit card data, and it certainly shows that activity is down in those lockdown LGAs.
By how much?
I can't tell you.
Do you have expectations, or has Treasury ever prepared any advice or expectations as to what it expects?
What I can tell you is that there has been more an overweight amount of applications for the business support from the lockdown LGAs. So for the micro business grant, I can tell you that the top 3 LGAs that for applications were all lockdown LGAs. And I can also tell you that of the top 3 for JobSaver applications, one of those was one of the lockdown LGAs. So based on the data we have, it's clear that those have been impacted by more than the other parts of the state, and that comes as no surprise given the more intense movement restrictions that applied in those areas.
Look, Mr Kelly, that is very helpful, and I think perhaps later in the session we might return for some more specific data on all the grants programs as well, because again it's always a very helpful update the Treasury provides in these estimates sessions. But before we do that, Minister, you accept that the rollout of assistance had its issues?
Absolutely. I was out there in the public arena saying that I was unhappy about it.
Indeed, you were. And it's helpful that you did. And equally, it's been described by others, I think you may have, as I made a reference to the fact that it was a bit of a debacle. Do you agree?
Well, I don't know if I use the word debacle, but I expected the money into businesses' accounts more quickly than it was getting there, and I have to say that there was a very significant response.
And do you think that perhaps was the original criteria, eligibility criteria, correct now in retrospect?
I think probably yes. I think to the extent that it required or involved some manual assessment, I think that was part of where the delivery was a problem.
Do you think the evidentiary standards that were imposed on businesses were too onerous now in retrospect?
Well, it's always a difficult thing, Mr. Mookie. On the one hand, you've got to always make sure that you're trying to prevent fraud and the waste of taxpayer money, and on the other hand, you're caught in this.
And look, I just want to be clear, Minister, I agree with you, and I'm not critical of the fact that
I'm
support
sure you're not.
had to go out the door quickly, but I'm just asking you, insofar as we all agree that it was a bit of a debacle and or could have been done better, depending on which your perspective, whether I'm putting it or you're putting it, but did you get to the bottom of what caused it?
By and large, I think it was probably a combination of an IT issue, a manpower issue, making sure that we were able to stand up a system which is able to process applications. And often we were asking for supporting documentation in respect of establishing the downturn in a particular business. Sometimes that required cooperation of accountants and the like. So there was a significant impost on business. I think we threw a lot more manpower at it. I think we, in many respects, processed the applications more quickly. And, you know, on one hand, we may have been over cautious at the outset. I think we, in fact, fell on the side of wanting to make sure that we got money into businesses' accounts, and that was always
when were
my
you
priority.
First warned that the program was? When were you first warned that the program wasn't? When were you first warned that the money wasn't being distributed?
I think that there was within the first 7 days or so. I probably need to think about that.
Well, if you said within the first 7 days,
I said I need to think about
in the first week. Are we referring therefore that you were told?
I certainly was becoming aware of some public concerns in relation to how the money was getting out.
No official told you? You were actually relying on media reports to tell you that there was a problem? Or
No. We were certainly receiving information from
then why, if you were told within the first 7 days or thereabouts from both public reports and private officials, was there such an issue in terms of getting it fixed?
Well, we didn't. I don't think there was.
You don't think there was?
I think we got it fixed very quickly. We've got, just remember in this, we have carried out nearly $9 billion in support to businesses. And we've done that over a 4-month period. And we have supported business to the extent of just get your head around that for half a moment.
I appreciate that.
Now, some businesses waited for 10 weeks.
Businesses have gone out of... This is a serious...
Can you just let me finish this?
Really?
Just let me finish.
When one person to
Correct.
at a time.
Correct. Minister, you can put on notice the character assessment you'd like to provide me, but my actual question is, why did it take you so long to move then if you were told within the first 7 days that there was a problem?
Well, absolutely, I reject it.
Crossbench, Ms Boyd.
Thank you, Chair.
And wonderfully calm, Ms Boyd.
I'm sure this will be
always calm, particularly with you, Minister.
Thank you.
So I wanted to ask about the home builder grants that are being administered by Revenue New South Wales.
Yes.
How many applications has Revenue received for the home builder grant scheme, and how many have been approved?
If you're asking me for a specific number,
Yes, please.
I'd have to just ask.
Thank you.
That's not a number I have in front of me. Scott or Cullen, do you have that number?
Yes, Minister. Scott Johnston speaking. So the question to number of applications received was 26,054.
Mm-hmm.
And sorry, Ms. Boyd, the second question.
How many of them were approved?
So the home builder, we receive applications, and when they get to a progression through their build, they're then paid. So we're paid 11,667. We have 949 that we're assessing, and 2,505 have been assessed but are required further information, with only 672 of the 26,000 that were disallowed through assessment.
Okay.
And we have extra, and there's a large number that was not or hasn't been completed by the customer of 10,261, which particularly speaks to that point of they're not at a point to submit all their information.
Thank you. That's very useful. Minister, my office has been contacted by constituents that are trying to get help with a grant after Revenue rejected their appeal for assessment under extenuating circumstances. So these two constituents were building their first home. They entered into a contract in December 2020 with a builder. Yep. They had their building plans approved and met all of the eligibility requirements. Yep. They proceeded to start building their home, but unfortunately they got messed around by their building contractor. And it was quite a difficult situation. They had to make the decision to cancel the contract with that builder.
You wrote to me about this, did you?
That's right, and then entered into a new contract. Yep. And because they entered into that new contract after December 2020, they then weren't eligible for the homeowner grant, even though they had been. Now, I understand that under the official scheme rules and the agreement that was signed between New South Wales Government and the Commonwealth, that there's a very strict definition and no discretion. But what can be done for these people? They are 25,000, in fact more, because now they're not eligible for the first homeowners grant either. So they're roughly $35,000 out of pocket.
I get the specific example which you've put to me, and I think you answer a bit your own question in the sense of this is not a scheme which we created. This is a Commonwealth scheme which we administer, and so Revenue has to apply pretty well without discretion, as you've identified, the manner in which the scheme is administered. Now, there are circumstances where I do write to, have written to federal ministers about that, but the New South Wales Government doesn't have any discretion relating to the fact circumstances that you've identified. It'd be potentially a new scheme that you'd be asking to implement, but the home builder grant is a Commonwealth scheme, and I don't have any discretion in respect of the administration of that scheme.
I understand exactly that point, Minister. I imagine, though, that it's quite unusual to enter into a scheme with the Commonwealth Government where there is absolutely no discretion in situations such as this. Can you explain why New South Wales Government signed on to such a strict set of criteria?
Well, I can't give you that. The Treasurer may be able to, because I'm not involved in the negotiations relating to the delivery of those schemes. I get the problems that you've identified, where people do write into you and with those difficulties and anomalies. But in a perfect world, I'd be saying that there should be an opportunity for discretion. Whether that would exist in Revenue or whether it would have to be referred back to the Commonwealth would be a moot point, since it's their money, effectively, that we are spending. So it would probably, if there was a discretion, it wouldn't vest in the Commissioner. It would probably have to vest in the Commonwealth.
This couple have also sort of seen the cost of their build grow by more than $50,000 because of increasing construction costs as well. So they're in quite a lot of financial stress now. And clearly, you know, they began this on the basis that they would be eligible for this scheme. So, and I'm sure you understand
I do get it.
just how desperate this situation is. Will you write to your Commonwealth counterpart and see if there is anything that can be done for these people?
Ms. Boyd, I'm always happy to take on board those sort of circumstances. I can't guarantee you the result which you would like, but I'm more than happy to take a specific case on and make representations to the Commonwealth in relation to it.
Thank you. Will you do that if I send you all the information?
Sure.
Thank you. That's very useful. See how easy and calm this is.
It's lovely.
It is lovely.
See how there's no points of order.
Lovely. Another issue. Another issue that I have that's been drawn to my attention because of a constituent concern is in relation to the concession from transfer duties when transferring a property from a self-managed super fund to the members of the fund as a benefit. So under the current legislation, you can transfer a property to the SMSF fund with only a nominal, I think it's a $500 transfer duty fee. But if you then try to transfer it back, then you're stung with the entire costs as though you were transferring it to a wholly unrelated person. Now, I understand that Victoria, South Australia, Queensland, WA, Northern Territory, they all have exemptions or concessional rates in these exact circumstances. It's quite an impost on self-funded retirees. Surely this is just an oversight in our New South Wales legislation?
It may be something that I'm looking at. Mr. Smythe, is that something that we're looking at?
So, Minister, we are constantly reviewing the exemptions and the various charging provisions within our legislation. There are a couple of interesting factors that attach to transfers between entities. The legislation that we currently have is set up in a way that transfers between related parties or related entities are exceptionally limited. And that's on purpose, principally to avoid any tax avoidance. We are aware of the issues related to super fund transfers, and that's something that we're considering at the moment.
So you are considering changing the legislation?
I need to consider a couple of different factors in order to put it forward to the Minister.
Thank you. And Minister, is that something obviously subject to receiving the advice that you would be interested in taking forward?
I'd be happy to. Mr. Smythe always gives me very good advice, but the issue which he does advise in relation to making sure that we cover off anti-avoidance provisions is something that I'm sure that he will turn his mind to.
Thank you. And the other states seem to have got their heads around it and been able to provide that exemption for self-funded retirees, so that would be very helpful if you could, Minister. Thank you. That's all I have. Oh, Mr. Shoebridge will be coming in later.
No, you keep going, Abigail. You keep going.
Position.
Thank you. Abigail.
This is not going to. This is the Daniel Mookie show, is it?
It's just you and me on a Friday afternoon. We should sell tickets, Minister. We should sell tickets. What else would people rather be watching right now?
Sure.
Exactly.
What else are you watching, Ben? Minister, let's return to your bungled rollout. Can we go to, when you changed the criteria, especially for the COVID-19 business grants, what opportunity was provided to those who were originally excluded to reapply?
For the COVID business grants?
Yep. Let's be general. Whenever the criteria changed in respect to any of the grants programs, what opportunity was provided to the businesses that were originally excluded to reapply?
Well, I thought it would be...
So businesses that where the grants guidelines were amended and that amendment resulted in an expansion of eligibility, businesses were allowed to reapply.
Yes, but how was it communicated to them?
How'd you tell them?
So it was communicated through Service New South Wales.
What, on the website?
On the website.
So my understanding is that those businesses were, there were emails that went out, I understand also that it went out through the updates to the guidelines. But also those businesses were, I think a lot of them contacted Service New South Wales, and I understand Service New South Wales then came back to them and informed them that they could apply. That's
how many businesses are we talking about how many businesses are we talking about that were originally excluded that were then informed that they might be eligible?
So that's probably a question best directed to the Minister for Customer Service, because that's an operational issue. We as Treasury were the policy owner, and so from a policy owner perspective, we set the policy in a way that ensured that businesses were able to apply, renew their application if they were previously turned down, and that was the policy. How that was implemented was up to Service New South Wales.
Sure. I think my colleagues did actually ask such a question, and I think it might be the case that we were redirected here. It's always a wonderful part of budget estimates, I say. I'm enjoying that. But on notice, can we get how many businesses were informed about their right to reapply? Yeah. How many of them did reapply? How many of them were then successful? Is that possible we can take that on notice, Minister?
As part of getting $9 billion out the door, I'm happy to.
I think you meant $9 billion out the door.
I said $9 billion.
Oh, okay. I thought I've heard you properly. Let's actually turn to the JobSaver aspect, if you don't mind, Minister. Minister, you agree with me that JobSaver was a pivotal program to preserving both jobs and businesses in New South Wales?
I'm sure you'll agree with me that it was.
And you agree that the government put it in place after its request to the Commonwealth Government for JobKeeper wasn't agreed to?
Well, I'm aware that there was a significant discussion between the Treasurer and his counterpart, and potentially the Prime Minister and the Premier at the time.
No need to be cautious here, Minister. The now Premier has made this clear that the federal government refused to put JobKeeper and then JobSaver was put in place. That's correct, yes? Great. Were any conversations had by you with any federal counterpart about continuing JobSaver on beyond 30th November?
Not specifically, but certainly I'm aware that Treasury were involved in all those discussions. It didn't devolve to me.
Did Treasury ever provide you with advice that said that JobSaver, retaining JobSaver beyond 30th of November, would assist accelerating the economic recovery and small business recovery?
Did anyone actually? Did I make that represent, or did someone put that to me?
Well, now that you mention it, let's ask both.
That's all right. I'll ask the
Treasury. Treasury. Did anyone from Treasury, or now that you've given me the opportunity to re-ask it, or anyone else from your departments or officials ever advise you that retaining JobSaver beyond 30th of November would assist in the New South Wales economic recovery or the recovery of New South Wales small businesses?
Well, I'll ask Mr. Gadiel, in fact, to address those negotiations.
So I don't. I think it's. I think we've got to be careful in terms of talking about advice, but more broadly, I think where we're coming from is we want the economy to reopen, and we want businesses to restart, and so continuing JobSaver beyond the point at which restrictions are removed, we generally saw as counterproductive. But we did advise that it was worth retaining the infrastructure of the program in case there was a requirement for further restrictions down the track, that we had the policy built. But I don't think Treasury saw it as being advantageous to maintain JobSaver beyond the tapering date of 30th of November, as per the announcement.
Okay, well, that's actually very useful. Thank you, Mr. Gadiel. Did your advice to retain the infrastructure of the program, was that accepted by government?
Yeah, the program is obviously still there with service, and it's still being administered. The payments will cease after 30th of November under current policy, but there's the option there of restarting it. Let's hope not.
Minister, in what is a test to restart the JobSaver program in any form after 30th November?
Well, I assume the obvious test would be the extent to which there would be any further lockdown, but I don't think those policy positions have been adopted yet.
Look, to be fair, I accept that, you will have to have, but I'm asking you, obviously the lockdown, should there be a resumption of a statewide lockdown, then of course. But what I'm talking about specifically, if we find ourselves in a circumstance where any LGA is locked down, specifically, or any subset of an LGA is locked down specifically, is the program then, is that the trigger for that particular?
That's a hypothetical.
Well, it's important,
that's a hypothetical, and what I would be suggesting to you is that we'd have to assess that circumstance when it arose. And what I think you've just taken from Treasury is that the structure for delivering it is still available in the event that we need to. And
I'm really not trying to create any disputation around this point, right? I'm just trying to understand: is there actually a policy in place yet? And I accept that if it's still under development, or then so be it. But at some point, people are going to understand that if we find ourselves in a circumstance where a part of the state has to lock down again, is the economic structures and support in place?
One thing you can be assured of, Mr. Mookie, is this: that this is a government which is not shy of supporting businesses in circumstances.
Just go ahead.
Is not shy of supporting businesses in circumstances where we have to make difficult decisions which impact on those businesses. So the last 24 months have shown us, and shown hopefully you, that this is a government which will bend over backwards to make sure that we do our part in respect of supporting business.
I respect that, Minister, but my actual question is there a policy in place, and is it, when, if not, when will there be one, and when will it be communicated to the public?
Well, the development of a policy, has any work been done?
So there's no policy in place as far as I'm aware of. So that would be put together when and if required. But given that the infrastructure is in place, that could be done relatively quickly.
We would expect. Okay, fair enough. Thank you.
I think that expresses it exactly the same way as I was trying to express it, Mr. Mookie. Obviously,
but better.
Correct. No need to be abusive.
Fair enough. Let's talk about return to the issue of fraud. Now, of course, just to be clear here, when the government rolled this out quickly, it had the opposition support. In fact, we called for it. So we accept, of course, that there was the emphasis was on the need for speed to get the money out. But it was flagged that there would be audits taking place after JobSaver ends. Really simple question. Can you describe what is the audit process? When's it going to start? How is it going to be organised? When will it be finished?
Yeah, really important questions, and I think there's an expectation that we do have a process to identify fraud. Perhaps, Mr. Johnson, you'd like to perhaps outline the manner in which revenue has been charged in respect of identifying these issues and what we are doing about recovering potential overpayments of JobSaver money or payments which should not have been made in the first place?
Yes, thank you, Minister. Firstly, I'd like to differentiate compliance and fraud. So our colleagues at Service New South Wales are leading the effort in the engagement with police around fraud, but anything that we identify in revenue through our compliance function that might intimate fraud, we'll pass and work with Service on that. But to the bigger question, I think you're positioning to Mr. Mookie as in what are we doing? We had a fundamental moment where the federal government changed its legislation to enable greater data sharing between the ATO and Revenue for the purpose of Revenue New South Wales for the purpose of our compliance efforts around COVID grants. And so we've been receiving data from them over the past few weeks and analysing the submissions that businesses have provided to us through the micro business and but particularly JobSaver grant and the business grant that was before JobSaver, so that we can identify those areas where there's highest risk and have conversations with these businesses to identify whether there was an issue, and if there was, progressing that through to collecting back any overpayment that might have been made.
That's helpful. But the specific question is there going to be a specific or dedicated compliance program, or is this just going to be a part of Revenue New South Wales's general compliance activities?
No, this will be a specific effort that will be led by Revenue New South Wales to focus on these grants programs.
Great. So I presume it started the date that the program's notionally started, but when do you expect the audit that the Minister has flagged to be completed?
It's continuing. I think we will be following this through next year for much of next year to a degree, because a lot of these issues take time to resolve.
Of course.
We're also still at a point where we're waiting for the payments to end. One of the key features of JobSaver was a maintenance of headcount, and we need to assess pre and after the grants process to determine how successful that was and where there might be issues. So to a point, unfortunately, it's not completely, it's a bit too early to have a great sense of...
I appreciate that, Chief Commissioner.
But possibly our next opportunity will have made great success in progressing this.
Yes, and look, I mean, I appreciate that, and you do identify that the two features of JobSaver that I think we probably are going to be checking is whether or not businesses incurred the revenue downturn that would have entitled them to the payment. That's fair. That's one of the things you'll be testing.
Correct.
And then equally whether or not those who did and were eligible maintain the headcount as required, correct?
That's what we'll be doing, yes.
What else? Is there any other aspect of the JobSaver program that you're going to specifically be checking on?
We've got access to a range of data sources to assess the validity of applications, including those that are already payroll tax customers.
Yeah, I'm not disputing your ability to obtain information to undertake the compliance activity, but in terms of what you're actually checking, we're checking whether or not the businesses suffered the revenue downturn that they said that they did, and equally that they maintain the headcount as promised, correct?
That's correct.
Is there any other sort of eligibility criteria for which you'll be specifically checking?
We'll be working through the full guidelines to assess that their application was true and accurate. So this is where us working closely with service as well around payments information to assess is there any indication of fraud. So we in partnership with Service New South Wales will be doing that, and in fact a lot of Service New South Wales was highly successful in the application process in identifying many cases of this.
Well, this is what I wanted to then ask you about. What is the results of your compliance program so far?
So have we...
As in, how many businesses have you found, or JobSaver recipients is probably the better way of putting it, that you have found that either were paid benefits when they were not entitled to it?
It's too early to make an assertion whether that's the case. We are still working through payments to these businesses.
Sure.
What I can say at this point is that we're analysing and getting our information together, because it's important that we're not the ATO in having this information from the outset. What we provided in the guidelines was that people attested to the situation that they put forward, and now we're validating that. So what we have done is stopped many payments that would have progressed through, where we found inaccuracies through the assessment process, and that has...
Do you have the numbers?
I'll have to take that on notice, Mr. Mookie, if I could. I'll probably be able to find that before the end of this.
If you could find that by then, that would be helpful. How many incidences of fraud has Revenue New South Wales come across?
I'd have to refer that to Service New South Wales, because they're managing that, and because the majority would be through their workings, and we've worked incredibly tightly with them on this process and had our specific roles clearly.
Mr. Gadiel may be able to give you more information on that.
So I can tell you that so far for the COVID-19 business grants, there are 166 applications that have identified as being fraudulent. For the micro business grant, there are 172 in that category, and for JobSaver, it's 104.
Thank you. And when you mean fraudulent, when using what's the definition of fraud you're using for the purpose of those numbers?
So fraud implies a deliberate intent. So rather than it being inadvertent, yes.
Thank you. Minister, you're aware of the time that one of the issues that surfaced with JobSaver was significant amounts of public money going to companies that in turn increased their profits over the time?
Sorry, how big one?
You're aware that one of the issues arising from JobKeeper
Yes.
was significant sums of public money paid to companies and or businesses that increased their profit throughout that period?
Correct.
Do you have the same concern in respect to JobSaver?
I think we have a much stronger clawback arrangements.
What are the clawback arrangements that you're referring to?
Well, I assume it is that if people are not entitled to it, then it's got to be repaid.
When you say assume, what do you mean by
that's the case, isn't it?
So they've been structured as active grace payments, which gives the government a stronger legal basis upon which to recover payments.
Do you have to sue them?
So I'd actually probably go to Scott for this.
Yes, so this grant has been set up. So we have a state debt recovery order arrangement so that Revenue New South Wales can pursue any of those debts that are owed to the state. And that is a key difference, I think, from my understanding to JobKeeper. If I could, I'd also suggest that another key difference is we were asking for periods of turnover that had happened for the grants to be within the guidelines as opposed to predicting what your future turnover might be, which gives myself and my team more confidence around the compliance that the types of issues that you're referring to would be minimised significantly.
Okay, but just the principal recovery mechanism is a state debt recovery order, correct?
Yes.
And you have discretion to issue that yourself, don't you?
Within Revenue New South Wales, yes.
Well, you are the respective commissioners, so it's going to happen in your name. So, yes, you?
Right, yeah.
Great.
Yes, that's correct.
And sorry, you said that you assume. Have you got legal advice that makes it clear that that is a enforceable mechanism, that is a mechanism that you can use?
Yes.
Great.
Yes.
That's good to hear.
We've worked through the process to ensure that, just referring back to the comments made by Mr. Gadiel, the ability to claw back funds that have been paid under an act of grace under the Government Sector Finance Act, where conditions have not been complied with, are quite strong. And we will use the mechanism of the State Debt Recovery Act to do that.
Well, I have no doubt that the New South Wales' two best debt collectors are right here, right now. So, good luck. But, Minister, we had significant businesses like, for example, Harvey Norman, Nick Scali, Adair's, NIB Group, Car Sales, Tab Corp, claim JobKeeper and then find themselves making bigger profits. Are you planning at any form of public disclosure about the top businesses closer to the $200 million threshold and their results to allow the public to properly assess the efficacy of this program?
Well, I don't think it's a specific policy to disclose people who have applied.
But do we have analysis? Given that, correct me if I'm wrong here, Mr. Gadiel, but it was eligible for businesses with a turnover up to 250 million, was it?
250 million was the cut-off for the main JobSaver program. Although there was a category between 250 and $1 billion turnover for the tourism, recreational and hospitality sectors.
It's 250 to $1 billion for the tourism, recreation and hospitality, correct? Turnover?
Turnover.
In New South Wales or national?
National.
Okay.
And international, if they're affiliated, if they're part of a broader international group, then it would also incorporate their international revenues.
The crossbench time has expired.
Keep going. Yeah.
Thank you.
Unless you want a break.
No, we have our COVID break
3:15.
at 3:15, rest assured.
3:30. 3:30.
Oh, 3:30. Okay, that's all right.
Here we are. We'll just keep going. Okay, so sorry, Mr. Gadiel, before the crossbench quite disorderly time that expired, I didn't hear your answer there. It was 250 to $1 billion, and then you were talking about companies' international affiliations.
So it's their aggregate annual turnover, which includes international affiliates that are part of the group of companies.
International affiliates that are a part of a group of companies.
Yes. So it's an ATO definition, and so it incorporates both domestic and international revenues.
Just to be clear, this was only available to companies who are domiciled in Australia?
Correct. But they may well be subsidiaries of international groups.
Yes.
And if that was the case, then their international revenues would also be counted as part of that turnover test.
So how many...
Sorry, can I clarify though? Only for the purposes of falling into the eligibility category, when we go to the calculation of downturn, we only include the New South Wales revenues.
Got it. So to get through to be able to put an application, you have to meet the first set of criteria.
Yes.
But in order to then access a payment, you need to meet the other criteria.
Yes. Sorry, I think I've misled you a little bit. It's the national entity that is used for the downturn, but it's ungrouped. So if it's part of a group of firms, we just look at that specific firm, but we look at its national revenue, and the requirement is that national revenue decline by 30%.
That sounds pretty straightforward.
Yes. And the reason why we've gone for that is because those are the things that firms report to the tax office, so we can go back and check.
Fair enough. But let's just go through this a bit step by step. How many entities that were with turnover between $250 million to $1 billion got payments?
So it's a very small number, and it's in my notes, so I'm happy to provide it.
Why don't you look it up?
Yeah, okay.
While I ask some other questions.
Yes.
This is a standard protocol I have with the people from Revenue New South Wales at all estimates proceedings. We give them the look-up time. It's specific. Okay. Whilst you're there, is it responsibility of Revenue, Service New South Wales or Treasury, or all of the above, to maintain the statistics that would allow for a distributional analysis? Minister, maybe the Chief Commissioner might be able to assist us while Mr Gadiel is looking.
I have the number in front of me now.
Great. Back to you then.
So for those large businesses of a turnover between 250 million and $1 billion, I can tell you that the number paid was 7.
7 of them. And what industries were they from, as you classify?
Yeah, so they were, okay, I do have that also, but in a different part of my notes.
Don't worry, Mr Gadiel, I know the feeling of having to go back and forward between notes, but...
Sorry, I don't have that.
But they were either from hospitality.
They were tourism, hospitality. So they're large. They're the industries that are highly exposed and have been subject to orders of one form or another for 18 months. So
are they natural persons or are they legal corporate persons?
So they're businesses.
Yes. Okay. We're talking airlines.
Sorry.
Are they airlines?
No, not airlines, no. So it's tourism, hospitality and recreation, so things like pubs, clubs, restaurant chains, things like that.
Okay, of the 7?
I can't tell you specifically of the 7, but I can speak generally towards the eligibility. So I don't know if we have the data, and given that it's so few, I think we're going to run into confidentiality issues. So normally, with less than 10 in a cell, we'll have trouble, giving specific information.
Mr Gadiel, it's almost like you've got Mr Johnson's script here.
Yes.
And the script from Revenue New South Wales about statutory secrecy.
I can talk to the categories, the ANZIC categories.
Well, it's just that there's not that many. Yeah. If there's 7 of them. There's not that many businesses that are in hospitality tourism that have revenue turnover of 250 to 11, so to $1 billion.
I think we worked out that there were a couple of hundred in New South Wales.
That were eligible?
Yeah, that could theoretically be eligible.
Okay, of a couple of hundred, so it's not a low rate of take-up, but is there any specific compliance programs going to be attached to those particularly larger enterprises or not? Are they going to be treated the same way as a mum and pop shop on a corner?
So, look, Revenue New South Wales reviewed the applications, and Scott has his hand up, so I'll pass to him.
Thank you. So, the businesses of this size, we typically know them very well because they would be
Yes, you do.
payroll tax customers. So I think there's a high degree of rigour and confidence around the compliance efforts that we'll be able to do for those businesses.
But look,
And be different because we'll have more information about them.
sure. And look, I don't want to repeat for the 50th time, Mr. Johnson, our battle about statutory secrecy provisions as it applies to evidence that's given in a committee. So let's just talk around it and we can pursue this elsewhere. But are we talking, do you have any information about the nature of the 7 businesses as to whether they arise from hospitality, tourism? So what was the other category? Are we talking about a pub group? Are we talking about a casino? What are we talking about in terms of the nature of the
I
7 businesses?
I think pub groups featured heavily. So it was...
Okay, pub groups, to the extent to which... Right, so of the 7, we can expect that there was a disproportionate, and there's nothing critical. I mean, I'm not critical of them. If they're eligible, they're allowed to apply, but it is the case that we had, pub groups be amongst the 7?
So I can't remember specifically what they were, but I'm seeing the list and I think there were at least several pub groups in there, and that comes as no surprise given pubs were completely shut down.
Of course.
Yeah, and have been subject to patronage restrictions throughout.
Yes, no one disputes the eligibility or the fact that it had a huge impact on those industries and those jobs of lots of people who work in them. So I'm not at all critical. I'm just trying to ascertain, therefore, what is the nature of the businesses we're talking about. We're talking about pubs. Any other nature or any other information you can provide us about the nature of those 7 businesses?
Not right now for me. Scott?
I'm also, Mr. Mookie, as you wouldn't be surprised, concerned about...
I can give you your script for you. Don't worry, Chief Commissioner.
Yeah, he could probably give you the questions.
I think maybe an appropriate path would be for us, or for me, to take that on notice and provide some information that might be broad, speaking to the industry types, but might be helpful for you.
Can we get a quantum as to how much these 7 received?
I'll take that on notice.
I have that.
What was the cap? What was the maximum that they could receive?
So there were 2 caps. So there was the Tier 1 cap. So for businesses with a turnover of between 250 million and 500 million, the maximum payment was 300,000 per week. And for Tier 2, where the businesses had a turnover of between 500 million and $1 billion, they needed to have a turnover decline of at least 70%, and the cap was 500,000 per week.
Okay, so the maximum, look, is 500,000. Is it by 16? Well, it's more than 16 weeks because they're still eligible, correct?
Yeah, so I can tell you that so far paid for this group, the total is $12 million.
$12 million to the 7
Yes.
enterprises. Fair enough, thank you. And how much again has been spent on JobSaver by New South Wales?
JobSaver, is that including the Commonwealth contribution or excluding it?
Excluding.
So, look, I can't. Yeah, I can tell you that let's have a look. Hang on. For JobSaver,
yes,
it's around $6 billion. So half of that would be the Commonwealth.
So $3 billion or thereabouts is for New South. That's how much that it was modelled for. How much has been paid?
That's how much has been paid
so far. We're at $3 billion-ish for New South Wales.
Yes.
Fair? Okay, fair enough. Thank you. In terms of how much has been of JobSaver has been paid to small businesses with a turnover of less than $1 million? And how many small businesses? Do you have that data? What data do you have about the distribution of JobSaver? That's probably the first question I should ask.
So we don't have data on turnover because that wasn't a question we needed to ask the business. We needed to check that they were within the range.
Yep.
And so we asked them for their payroll, but we did not ask them for their turnover. So we don't have that.
That's fair. Then have you got any analysis that would allow us to indicate the distribution by decile or decile analysis of the distribution, for example, by payroll?
So we haven't got that.
What do you have?
So we've got the holistic figures, right? So how much was paid, the number of businesses that have received the support. We will do more analysis over time, but at the moment that's what we have.
Okay, why don't you give me that?
So as I said to you before, so 6 billion was paid. 5 billion of that is metro. 1 billion of that is regional. We have approved, so that covers around 206,000 businesses.
Sorry, how many?
Sorry?
How many was that?
206,000 businesses, approximately, of which 168,000 are roughly metro and a further 38,000 are regional. So that's an 82% going to the metro and 18% going to the regions.
Just to be clear, metro, is that Sydney?
That's the Greater Sydney region, including Shell Harbour and Blue Mountains and Central Coast.
But not Newcastle.
Not Newcastle, no. The number of... so we have a further 2,400 applications approved but not yet paid, and we've got around 2,700 applications in progress for JobSaver.
207, isn't it?
Yeah, 2,700 in progress.
Do you, of that 100, of the 206,000 businesses, do you have that broken down either with you now or on notice by LGA?
Yes, we do have LGA splits.
Can you either table that split or provide it to us on notice for New South Wales LGAs?
Yeah, so I have one copy here, so I might hang on to that, but I'm happy to provide that on notice.
Okay, if you did want to table it, we can make copies, but I'm in your hands here, Mr. Gadiel. Yep, you better check. Can you give us the top 10 LGAs?
So my list here,
and just the top 10 LGAs and how many businesses in the LGA would be great. Oh, the Minister has the list.
Going to read us the list?
Want me to?
Have you seen that list
Please.
before, Minister?
I think the proposal was we would table.
Okay.
So you get a table it now?
so unsurprisingly, Sydney's the top,
Yep.
17,000. Next one down is Canterbury Bankstown with around 13,000 or 12,600. Then Northern Beaches at around 10,000, and it goes down from there. There's a lot around the 7,000 mark: Central Coast, Blacktown, Parramatta, Cumberland, Sutherland Shire, and then it goes on from there. So happy to table that.
Thank you.
Yes.
That would be great. If we could table that and get copies, that would be fabulous. Thank you very much. Okay, that's JobSaver.
JobSaver, I think that document contains the microeconomic grants as well.
Look, I'm really in your hands as to how you'd like to make this efficient for you, Minister and or Mr. Gadiel. But given that I would like to ask you similar questions about the business grants, payroll tax support.
Well, maybe it is better that we do take those on notice. And
why don't we just do the business grants?
It'll get copied and brought back to you. So I guess if those notes are required for you to answer the next lot of questions, we can manage that, is I think what Mr. Mookie is putting.
I am interested in getting the well, let's start with the macro numbers on the COVID grants, if we don't mind. Can we give us the same numbers as to how much has been paid out?
Yes. So the COVID business grant?
Yes, please.
So a total of 201,235 have been received.
Applications?
Applications.
So can you repeat that number, please?
201,235.
Yep. Yes.
169,546 for the metro.
So 169.
169,546.
Yep, metro.
Regional, 31,225. That's an 84/16% split between regional and metro. So we're seeing around around 80% going into the Greater Sydney region, which comes as no surprise given the differential movement restrictions in Greater Sydney compared to the rest of the state.
Yes.
Particularly at that time. So the number paid out were 186,622.
Yes.
And the metro was 158,076. Regional was 28,112.
Yes.
And the split here is slightly different. It's 85% metro, 15% regional.
Yep. And we're using the same definition of metro as before?
Yes.
And how much money has been paid out?
So the amount paid out was 2.34 billion.
2.434 billion, yep. Do you have information, same information on LGAs, top three? Can you give
so
us?
it's in the table paper.
Coming. Thank you very much. Do we have similar figures? Minister, tell me if this is not you, right? But for the COVID disaster payments to individuals, is that administered by revenue, and has revenue got responsibility for?
So the COVID disaster payments are administered by Services Australia. So
that's right. We'll go there. And in terms of payroll tax, let's talk about the payroll tax discount aspect of it. Do we have the numbers of reductions, waivers? Well, I'm reading from your thing: 50% reduction in eligibility criteria, payroll tax deferrals. Do we have the numbers on deferrals?
Yes, I can answer that, Mr. Mookie. As of the 30th of September, 24,973 customers have benefited from the reduction.
Can you repeat that? Your audio is a bit, Mr. Johnson.
Oh, sorry. 24,973 customers have benefited from the reduction to a total value of $374.8 million.
So, given that there are circa 52,000 payroll tax customers, as you put them, or citizens as I call them, in New South Wales, so we've got close to half.
That's correct, but there is criteria for that payment, and I expect we will see more and more.
You anticipate? Do you have a projection as to how much you anticipate?
I haven't currently, because it's dictated by the turnover decline.
Okay.
Significantly subscribed would be my sense currently.
Oh, yes, I would probably agree with you. And is this on a 12-month repayment plan?
Yes, so as of 30th of September, we have 1,404 customers on a payment arrangement.
Okay, so how long is the payroll tax deferral? How long do those 24,000 businesses who've got deferrals get the deferral for?
So they have 12 months. It's a 12-month deferral.
Of what? Their annual assessment or their monthly assessment, or?
So there's a number of measures. Let me just make sure I'm referring to the correct. So all payroll tax customers have the option of deferring lodgement and payment for the 2021 annual reconciliation until 14th of January next year. Customers also have the option of including any outstanding amounts from the previous financial year and or July to December 21 monthly periods in a 12-month interest-free instalment plan.
Okay, thank you. On notice, any additional detail you wish to provide, Chief Commissioner, would you?
Yes,
thank you very much. Can we have the land tax numbers, Chief Commissioner?
So for the...
Let me be very specific. In respect, look, I mean, some of this is follow-up from last year's announcement on the $220 million of waiver for commercial sector from land tax, you recall?
Yes.
Yeah. So do we know how many land tax concession applications were received for the first eligibility period of 1 April 2020 to 30 September 2020?
So we had three phases in the 2021 year where we had 17,259 applications for 26,947 properties.
Sorry, can you repeat those two numbers, please?
Yeah, sure. 17,259 applications
Opposition.
For 26,947 properties. Now, I could give you a commercial residential split if you would like that.
Yes.
Look, Mr Johnson, if you're going to offer it, I'm going to take it.
So 17,852 commercial properties provided rent reduction to the value of 6.4 billion. 9,095 residential properties provided rent reduction to the value of 303 million.
And so what is the value of the land tax concessions that we have given?
So, Mr Mookie, the relief granted is 223.8 million in land tax relief.
Over what period of time?
That was for the period of application where there was various phases in the previous financial year, but cumulatively it's 223.8.
223.8, and that was 0.8, and that is for the last financial year, so the financial year that ended 2020, 2021?
Correct.
Okay, and that covers, that 2223 covers both residential and commercial, correct?
Yes, and I can help you with that as well, Mr Mookie. 15,592 commercial properties at a value of 207.5 million in land tax relief, and 7,954 residential properties for the value of 16.4 million in land tax relief.
Okay. Minister, you know the inevitable questions are now coming your way, don't you?
I'm waiting.
Yes, good. Well, you promised $440 million. You paid $223 million. You missed the mark a bit, didn't you?
Well, it depends on how you look at it. I have to say, sometimes when people don't apply for money to go out the door, then that's money available to be able to spend on other opportunities to support businesses, Mr. Mookie. So,
and pray tell, that $200 million that you didn't spend,
it's all gone. You can rest assured that when you spend $9 billion, it gets soaked up pretty quickly.
Yes, but see, the issue is that we have how much? It was 7,000 residents. Oh, we lost them. 7,000. You're on your own. Ministry, that's right. We had 7,000, 7,500 thereabouts.
Residential
Yep. Properties, which we can imply, therefore, 7,500 renters got support through this program. You aware that we have over 1 million renters in New South Wales?
Well, you're telling me. I'll accept your figure.
Okay, good, thank you. So, basically, nothing was really given to renters last year, correct?
Well, that's not necessarily true. What it indicates that there's been a low take-up rate of a concession which was made available by the government. That's what it indicates. It doesn't indicate that we haven't provided support for renters.
Okay. Fair enough. You defend the program?
I defend the program.
Would you do anything differently in retrospect?
You can't force people to make applications for grants.
It's basically their fault, is it?
I have to say, well, I don't attribute blame. I just say that you can't force people to take up grant. I think it was part of a package of opportunity which is available to businesses. I have to say that to the extent that we got that money out the door, there were potentially businesses who should apply for grants who didn't for whatever reason. That's a matter for them. But really, it's got to be considered in the context of. Got to be considered in the context of the total package available. And when you talk about rent relief being offered by landlords, that's part of a package pursuant to the National Code, where we have provided significant relief to tenants in respect of their obligations.
Minister, didn't you delay the reintroduction of the National Code?
Delay it?
You were the last state to put it in place, weren't you?
Sorry?
New South Wales was the last state to proclaim the National Code, wasn't it?
In which particular pandemic?
The current pandemic, which took place, but I'm talking specifically about last year, 2020. You were the last to put the code in place, correct?
Well, because we in fact took the view that most businesses were being supported by their landlords, but to the extent that it was necessary, we deemed it necessary to apply the code again. And the evidence available to us, and I think the Commissioner will bear me out on this, is that... Yeah, he better, yeah. He better, you get it. But he will bear me out on this, is that by and large businesses were negotiated and dealing with their landlords to the extent that we initially thought this was a pandemic which could be confined in a period of time.
Basically, you got it wrong for the right reasons, is your...
Well, I don't think anyone got it right, Mr. Mookie, in terms of how long we thought this pandemic would
be fair,
and how...
Other states did provide direct relief to tenants because of this particular issue.
And
your government did. You would have been better off if you did, didn't you?
It doesn't mean that we didn't. It means that we had in place a significant opportunity of landlords negotiating directly with their tenants.
Oh, he just said they did.
Minister, let's just come forward in time. We accept last year's program didn't work. Let's talk about this.
Well, no, I don't accept that.
Okay, fair enough. You don't accept it.
But don't say it if you know I'm not going to accept it.
Well, the program doesn't work if no one uses it, Minister.
No.
It's like a hospital.
One of those hospital with no patients. Is it one of those?
We got $260 odd million.
All about them.
$260 million.
Let's not talk about regional New South Wales.
Can we just go forward in time? Because I'm eager to get the Chief, the Small Business Commissioner in here to talk about tenant and the code, which is an important issue. But before we do that, how many of the monthly grants of up to $3,000 for small commercial landlords that face financial hardship have been paid?
I don't think the program is...
So the program is still open. So it's open. Applications close on the 31st of December. And so it's too early to say that it's undersubscribed.
No, I'm not suggesting it is.
Yeah.
But
So what we found last time was that the application generally didn't go in until the landlord and the tenant had negotiated a rental abatement agreement. And those agreements often come late in the process, and then the application for the tax concession follows after that. So frequently those applications can be back-end loaded.
Yes, but what's your expectations of take-up? What's the budget?
So we haven't revised our expectations at this point because we just don't know enough about what the take-up is likely to be.
Okay, but it's something different than we've done that other states weren't doing. So
it might be
fair, you had the money left over.
It might be worth pointing out that the global budget was an estimate, but if we don't reach that number, that may be a fault with our upfront estimate and not necessarily with the program, because the data that we were working with in order to establish that estimate was quite weak.
Okay, I accept that, Mr. Gadiel. Can we get some updated? So we had last year's financial figures on land tax relief. There was a land tax relief period for the 16 weeks, wasn't there? And it has been since this, that's correct? Yeah, how many people?
So Mr. Mookie, the question being how many have applied for the 21-22 program?
Yes.
So the current number that I have is 2,952 applications or 3,116 properties. The splits for this one, like I gave previously, is 2,599 commercial properties provided rent reduction to the value of $199.5 million, and 517 residential properties provided rent reduction to the value of $28.8 million. We've currently granted $17.4 million in land tax relief for 440 properties, which the breakup would be 759 commercial properties receiving $16.8 million in land tax relief and 121 residential properties to the value of $0.6 million in land tax relief.
And what, are you processing the remaining applications? Are they unprocessed?
It's live. We're continuing to work through this. I would expect, like the last year's iteration, we'll receive many more applications closer to the finalisation date.
Which is when?
But it's the end of the year.
31st of December.
31 December. And how many so far have been rejected?
I don't have that on me, Mr. Mookie, but I'll see if I can get that quickly.
Very kind. Thank you very much. Let's talk. Do you mind, Mr. Minister, if we start talking now to the Small Business Commissioner about his mediation services and how that's going?
I'd be delighted.
I'm sure he's going to bail you out. Small Business Commissioner, can you give us an update as to how your mediation service is currently working?
Yeah, so we have 42 external panel members who provide mediation services across the state. Numbers since the 1st of January, we've had 1,681 applications. In terms of into the end of September, in terms of set-down mediations, 479. So a little less than the same point last year, but tracking very strongly compared to previous years.
And is the nature of the disputes that they're asking you to mediate to do with disputes of it?
They're primarily landlord-tenant disputes.
Yep.
And obviously negotiations around rent reduction and or rent deferral.
Do you have views as to resolution rates?
So 90% that come to us, recognising that a lot of landlords and tenants do agreements privately, but of those that come to us, 90% are settling before the need of a court and 86% are settling at or before mediation.
Good. And how much have you collected in mediation fees?
So collected 539,000 from 1 January to 30 September this year.
Minister, was any thought given to waiving that during the COVID period? Waiving the mediation fees.
Mr. Mookie, I can add a lot more small business tenants are actually using the $1,500 voucher for government fees and services. So we try and promote that as a way of reducing the cost of mediation.
That comes at the expense of other government fees?
Potentially, yes, that is right, Mr. Mookie.
Yes.
Yeah.
So hence my question, Minister, was any thought given to waiving that fee for that service?
Well,
given it's relatively
I think that observation is really important. One is that there is a significant benefit obtained by the tenant of achieving a mediation result. So it's a good use of that money, is what my response would be.
For a small business that is fighting for its life, perhaps free mediation for a lockdown period is something that the government could have considered. Was it considered?
I have to say that the mediation service, which we have significantly funded as part of this package, is a very successful package that has benefited most of the small businesses that have applied. They have got a significant benefit out of the mediation service which is available.
You're saying it's a good return on investment for them to pay that fee?
A good use of a government grant.
Okay, you keep defending that.
Minister, I will keep defending it. I will keep determination because we've just increased that.
Have you reached a determination on Kate Carnell's recommendation for there to be the introduction of binding mediation and arbitration through the Office of Small Business Commissioner, and insofar as the statutory review provided an insight as to whether or not the government should give Mr Lamont powers to arbitrate and make binding determinations? What's the government's policy response to that question?
Well, I'll let Mr.
No, it's a policy question. It's to you.
It is.
Can't answer on policy for government policy.
Come on, Daniel.
It's true. Literally, is it government policy to make it binding arbitration or not?
I'm aware of the suggestion, and in fact,
we're thinking about it.
I think mediation is an appropriate process to go through.
I asked you this 2 years ago.
Just let me.
You're doing so well, Daniel.
Well, I've got to keep it interesting for people, Ben.
Almost at a break. Sorry, Minister.
Breaking now.
In terms of the policy position in relation to mediation of disputes between landlords and tenants, I generally think that we have a successful mediation program available. It works well. Making it compulsory is not necessarily something that I have promoted.
I accept that.
The Commissioner may have a different view.
To be fair, the question wasn't about tenancy disputes. It was about giving the Commission power, under his Act, powers to make binding arbitration and mediation over many disputes, which would include franchise disputes and many others. You accept that? That was the recommendation?
I do.
So hence I'm asking you, as a policy response from the government, given that this statutory review was given to you years ago, has the government finalised its position on such suggestions?
It is not a position that I currently hold.
Okay, fair enough. That's an answer.
And on that note, it's time for us to have a break, so we will right as I lose my voice. So we'll switch the broadcast off and we'll be back at 3:45. I'll just remind the witnesses who are online to Welcome back.
Madam Chair, before the short adjournment, I recall a question being asked by Mr Mookie was, in fact, in relation to the hardship fund for landlords, and am I correct in identifying that?
Sure, keep going.
No, well, it may or may not need further clarification, but the answer given was in respect of land tax relief offered to landlords who had in fact provided assistance to their tenants.
Yes.
And I think you prefaced the question by asking in respect of applications under the hardship fund, because you may recall that the government, as part of the package, provided to landlords an opportunity to make application to a hardship fund in circumstances where they had provided relief to their tenants, and they could make application to that fund. Now, I'm not sure that the answer in relation to land tax relief also was meant to encompass applications to the hardship fund.
Oh, look, it was just a general update on land tax. But thank you for clarifying.
Well, I just didn't want there to be any suggestion that they are two separate forms of relief. One is a hardship fund, the other is a land tax relief.
Thank you.
So we'll resume questions with the opposition.
Great, thank you. Let's talk about some of the other aspects of COVID enforcement. Can we talk about do we have numbers on the total number of infringement notices that were issued for breaches of the COVID-19 public health orders between 1 July 2021 and 11 October 2021 that Revenue New South Wales has collected?
Is that a question about COVID
infringements public health orders that Revenue New South Wales is now collecting? Do we have the number of public health order infringement notices that were issued?
Well, we do have the number, but I suppose the policy position in relation to the number, which underpins the number, is that we're committed to collecting money which is due and payable pursuant to...
yes, I have no doubt the policy of the government is to collect money.
Well, it's always good to preface the answer and the numbers on the basis of the efficacy of the public health orders and why they are in place. But I'll then pass to Mr Johnson to identify the recovery process in relation to public health order.
Well, that's
breaches.
good. I'm interested in the recovery process for those things, but I'm also interested in the number.
Number that have been issued.
So, Mr Mookie, from the 25th of June this year to the 17th of October, there were 49,962 fines issued.
Sorry, your audio's a bit checky again. 25th of June to the 19th of October?
17th.
17th of October, how many?
49,962.
Okay, and how many of those were for people who are residents of LGAs of concern? Do you have that broken down? Or do you have it broken down by LGA?
I would have to take that on notice, Mr Mookie, but I would be able to provide that.
Thank you very much, Chief Commissioner. Do you know the total value of infringement notices that were issued to people living in LGAs total value of infringement notices of the 49,000?
The total value is $45,504,900.
$4,900. Sorry, can you repeat that?
$45,504,900.
Thank you. And has that all been collected, or are you in the process of collecting it?
No, we're in the process of collecting.
Okay. And again, do you have that broken down by LGA, or can you get that broken down by LGA?
I can do that, Mr. Mookie. Yes, I'll take that on notice. I don't have it with me.
Okay, thank you very much. And do we know how many, has any of the, well, I should actually ask, those 49,000 infringement notices, do you know how issued to how many people?
I'll come back to you on that specific number. It would be similar but there will be some multiples of it.
Do you know how many of them were businesses?
Fines issued to businesses, 436.
436 fines to businesses? Yeah.
Yes.
And do you have the value of the infringement notices issued to those businesses?
2.16 million.
And is that a part of the 45 million that you referred to before?
Yes, that would be.
Yeah, okay. And can you tell me how many hardship applications have you received?
And if I can... Yeah, I'm not sure. Sorry, I'll take that on notice as well.
Okay. Wouldn't Minister, for a variety of the grant programs, businesses that were, or applicants who were found to be ineligible, were some of them were capable of recourse to the hardship assessment, correct?
Yep.
Who made that assessment?
Who makes it?
Yes.
I think the Chief Commissioner is responsible for...
Well, it's just sort of, it was a bit ambiguous in the public communication because I wasn't sure whether there was a reference to the hardship board that exists in terms of which hardship to provide additional assistance, for example, micro businesses or others who did not meet the eligibility criteria. Who actually processed hardship applications?
I think Revenue is processing those hardship applications or is charged with responsibility of processing those applications.
Do you have numbers as to how many applications were received by applicants for grants programs that were denied under the main criteria?
I can give the number of applications we've received. They've not necessarily been all previously denied, though. I would have to...
Sure, just give me...
Applied before.
It's 142.
142.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Gadiel. And what were they for? Which programs? JobSaver, the micro, the COVID grants, I expect were the three big?
I don't know right now. We can take that on notice.
Thank you very much. Do you know the outcomes of those 142 hardship applications?
Yes, if I can get myself more organised, I will be able to.
Okay, we might pause there and allow Mr. Shoebridge to have his question, Chair.
Oh, thanks, Chair. Minister, officials, nice to see you all. Minister, as Minister for Finance, what are your portfolio responsibilities in relation to cemetery management?
Well, I don't think cemeteries doesn't fall under any of the allocation of acts for which I'm responsible.
Well, can you indicate what your involvement has been on the issue of cemeteries in the last few months in government?
You asked me a question about this, Mr. Shoebridge, in the chamber. I gave you a response in the chamber that the issue relating to cemeteries is a matter which is currently before Cabinet, and I won't be answering questions in relation to matters which are currently before the Cabinet.
Well, in relation to cemetery management, I'm told that members of the Greek, Muslim and Christian Orthodox communities have sought to have meetings with you, especially given their requirements for burial enactments. In terms, have they?
Not to the best of my knowledge, the answer to that is no.
Are you willing to meet with them?
Well, you asked me a question in relation to whether it's in my responsibility. I'd have to say that if people, I don't shy away from having meetings with people who want to make applications to me or representations to me, but the minister responsible for this is Minister Pavey. I would have thought that the appropriate person to be having meetings with in respect of cemeteries and cemetery policy would be the responsible minister.
Well, yes, but the concern is, Minister, that you or members of your office have directed senior New South Wales Treasury officials to model additional options from those put forward by the Portfolio Minister in relation to Crown Cemetery reform, which are based upon the continuing involvement of the Catholic Archdiocese, and people want to speak with you about that. So that's not unreasonable, is it?
Well, I've told you already, and please don't try and cross-examine me about a matter which is before a Cabinet. I'm not going to engage in a discussion about confidential Cabinet matters and the outcome of those matters. It is entirely inappropriate to use this as a forum to try and explore a Cabinet decision and the process of a Cabinet decision relating to cemeteries.
Well, Minister, it would be, potentially, except for the fact you're stepping well outside your ministerial responsibilities.
Well, you say that, Mr. Shoebridge.
You are. You're stepping well outside your ministerial responsibilities
point of order.
by putting matters
Point
to
of order.
Cabinet.
Sorry, Mr. Shoebridge, I'll take the point of order.
Madam Chair, I know that there's a lot of leniency given to the broad range of topics that are discussed in budget estimates, and Mr. Mookie, for example, has pushed the envelope a little today, but I haven't jumped in at all because they were reasonable questions. This is now going way beyond. It's obviously something that's before Cabinet to start with, which is the first point. The second point, he's asking for matters of opinion. He's asked, his fundamental question was, would he meet with people? The Minister has answered that question already. He's made it clear that he's not going to answer further because it's currently before the Cabinet. I ask that the member continue to move on and rule this line of questioning out of order.
Well, to the point of order, it's clearly within the terms of reference, I'm, if nothing else, exploring what is before Cabinet that we can't talk about, and clearly within the terms of reference.
Yeah, excuse me. The questions are not out of order. The Minister is entitled to answer them as he sees fit and is doing so.
Minister, had you completed your answer?
Well, I'd reinforce the point that this is not my portfolio responsibility.
Well, so then, Minister, I ask again, why was it that you brought to Cabinet, with only a few days' notice, a proposal in relation to cemeteries which gave an ongoing role for the Catholic Archdiocese? It's not in your portfolio. What were you doing even bringing it to Cabinet?
You say that, Mr. Shoebridge. It is a matter before Cabinet. I am not going to engage in a conversation with you about a matter which is before Cabinet. I have input on most matters which appear before Cabinet, and I'm not going to engage in a conversation with you about what I did or did not do in relation to cemeteries before the current Cabinet, and you know it.
Minister, were you a board member of the Catholic Cemeteries Board Limited?
I have disclosed that continuously, including in the House, in an answer to you.
Well,
the answer is yes.
And when were you a board member of the Catholic Cemeteries Board Limited, which, as we both know, is the appointed reserve manager of the Crown Trust, being the Catholic Metropolitan Cemetery Trust?
To the best of my recollection, I resigned that position when I took on the role of Chief of Staff to the Attorney General in 2011.
And have you disclosed that as a potential conflict of interest or conflict of interest in all or any deliberations involving either the Cabinet or the Expenditure Review Committee of Cabinet when the issue of cemetery reform has arisen?
Yes.
Minister, is it true that the option that you sought Treasury officials to develop was actually in breach of the ICAC direct dealing guidelines and is estimated to cost New South Wales taxpayers at least $500 million in lost value? Is that true?
Mr. Shoebridge, you can give speeches in this forum if you want to in relation to that issue. I will not be commenting about any issues which are before the Cabinet. If you want to make a speech here in this forum about what I have or have not done in relation to cemeteries, keep on going, but I'm not going to be engaging in that conversation with you.
Wasting the time of senior public servants is outrageous.
Minister,
we have a job to do, you know, the job that Daniel was trying to prosecute.
Well, I'm going to take a point of order on Mr. Franklin. Minister, in August of last year, you'd be aware that the state government rejected the Catholic Cemetery Board Limited's proposal to transfer public cemetery land to another archdiocese-owned company. You'd be aware that that was rejected in August of last year?
Mr Shoebridge, that is a matter for the Portfolio Minister, and I suggest you ask those questions to the Portfolio Minister responsible.
Indeed. Well, Minister, you know, don't you, that under that deal, that would have meant the Catholic Cemetery Board Limited and Catholic Cemeteries Crematoria Limited would have taken control of the city's cemeteries on a 99-year lease, together with $130 million in perpetual funds. That was the proposal, wasn't it, Minister?
Mr Shoebridge, you and I well know that my position in front of this Estimates Committee is that you can make the speeches. I will not be commenting on matters which are currently before Cabinet.
Well, Minister, are you aware of the fact that that proposal, which was designed to benefit non-government entities, the Catholic Cemeteries Board Limited and Crematoria, that proposal...
It's not actually about trying to find real information.
I'll start again.
It's pathetic.
You're above this. Come on.
Mr Franklin,
point of order.
so
You've been very well behaved then.
Mr Shoebridge has the call. He can ask these questions.
Now.
The Minister will answer as he sees fit. Let's just get through the rest of the afternoon. Mr Shoebridge has the call.
Minister, are you aware of the fact that the proposal that was brought by the Catholic Cemetery Board Limited that would have benefited the Catholic Archdiocese and entities associated with it, that the costs of developing that proposal were actually met from the Catholic Metropolitan Cemeteries Trust funds, public funds? Are you aware of that fact?
Mr Shoebridge, I am not the Portfolio Minister in respect of cemeteries. Questions relating to cemeteries should be directed to the Portfolio Minister.
But Minister, you indicated in your answers to the House that you have significant expertise in relation to cemeteries, and I'm assuming therefore that you would have been aware of the fact that the $1 million cost or so of developing that proposal for the benefit of the Catholic Archdiocese was actually met from public funds and came out of the Catholic Metropolitan Cemeteries Trust funds. I'm assuming you would have been aware of that fact and troubled by it.
Shoebridge, I have already told you and answered your question in relation to this. I am not the Portfolio Minister responsible for cemeteries. To the extent that you are making assertions in relation to another minister's portfolio, I suggest that you use your time more effectively by reserving those questions for the Portfolio Minister.
Well, Minister, the reason I'm asking you these questions is because you have taken it upon yourself to directly involve yourself in this by bringing the matter to Cabinet, in a proposal to Cabinet directly involving and benefiting the Catholic Archdiocese. That's why I'm asking you. And if we can't cover that in budget estimates, what can we do? That's been your work. You've been doing that job as a minister, and now you're refusing to answer questions about it.
Can I suggest to you that all this does is display the Catholic bigotry which you have?
Minister,
and in fact, this is a line of questioning, Mr. Shoebridge, which is consistent with the absolute bigotry which you have consistently displayed not only in the Parliament but everywhere else in this state. So, if you want to continue your role as the High Priest of Catholic bigotry, continue doing it. I have always acted with the utmost propriety in relation to my involvement in that issue in terms of Cabinet discussions. I will not be disclosing Cabinet issues in relation to this issue, and I suggest to you you move on and ask me questions about my portfolio responsibility and not continue this whole line of questioning which is underpinned by your reliance on Catholic bigotry and the way that you express it, not only in the House but in this line of questioning.
Minister, you are suggesting?
I'm suggesting that this is bigotry.
Let me finish the question, Minister. You are suggesting that my asking you questions about whether $1 million of public money was taken from the Catholic Metropolitan Cemeteries Trust, public money was used to develop a proposal.
And I have answered
Let me finish, Minister. To develop a proposal to benefit the Catholic Cemeteries Board and the Catholic Archdiocese, you're suggesting that question about integrity of public money is Catholic bigotry. Is that really your position as a Minister of the Crown? Is that really your position?
Suggesting that
you equate integrity.
So seriously, you're just going to keep yelling over him, are you, David? That's your strategy.
The question's been asked.
I'm just suggesting to you that you are motivated by bigotry, David.
Well, I'm suggesting to you that you bringing that proposal to remove substantial value from the public and hand it over to entities controlled by the Catholic Archdiocese is motivated by your willingness to benefit the Archdiocese at the expense of the public.
I'm
giving you the opportunity to deny that now.
Are you? You say that, and I have consistently said to you that I will not be commenting. I will not be commenting in this forum about issues which are currently before Cabinet. And if you have an issue in relation to a particular management of a cemetery, you should be asking the Portfolio Minister.
I have an issue with matters that potentially are going to cost the Portfolio Minister. I have an issue with matters that are potentially going to cost the people of New South Wales $500 million or more, being rushed through Cabinet with 48 hours notice from a minister who has no apparent portfolio responsibility for it. And you are refusing to explain yourself, Minister.
You asked the Portfolio Minister about it. The fact that you're asking me about it...
I'm asking you about it because you brought it to Cabinet and you refuse to deny it. And you know full well you did.
And I refuse to accept it because I have consistently told you that I will not discuss in this forum matters which are currently before Cabinet. I told you that in the chamber.
Have you brought matters to Cabinet outside of your portfolio in relation to cemeteries?
I will not be discussing in this forum matters which are currently before Cabinet.
Okay, the opposition.
Minister, let me ask you a question about a specific concern.
About my portfolio, that'd be good.
Let me ask you, look, I'm conscious I might, with your permission,
Daniel
Minister,
was going to be the calm one.
I was the calm one.
No, that's what I'm saying.
Minister, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions, perhaps the final questions to the Small Business Commissioner and or Mr Gardner, and you can then decide if you would like to continue their attendance or not, if that's up to you. It's your discretion. Is that fair, Minister?
Yeah.
Sure. Minister, you're aware that the application of the toll on the M5 East has created a rat run around surrounding streets in St George, particularly around the Bexley Town Centre. The Bexley Chamber of Commerce reported an increase in noise from trucks, the loss of shopfront parking due to clearways applied in February 2020, and of course they've been dealing with the COVID-19 downturn. The Bexley Chamber of Commerce has written to the Small Business Commission after being referred by your office, and I'm wondering if you or the Small Business Commissioner can give us an update as to what assistance has been provided to those Bexley small businesses that are dealing with the rat runs, especially those arising from trucks that have not using the M5 East as a result of prohibitive tolls.
Well, that's a multifaceted question, Daniel, and a lot of it, again, is outside my portfolio responsibility, but I don't shy away from this fact that...
Minister, just on the portfolio responsibility...
No.
Because they asked, you referred them to the Small Business Commission.
Sure.
And they are a Chamber of Commerce that represents small businesses, so let's just accept they are within your portfolio responsibilities and just give me the update.
What I would say is, though, in relation to it is we have a responsibility to develop a road system which relieves congestion in this state. When we came to office in 2011, the greatest complaint which I heard from constituents in respect of the impact on their day-to-day lives was sitting in traffic. So what we have in fact done in many respects is deliver the infrastructure which the many previous governments failed to deliver over a long period of time.
Can we just get to the Bexley assistance, because these small businesses...
So what we have done, in fact, which in fact benefit a whole host of small businesses, both in the delivery of the infrastructure, but in the existence of a complete overhaul of the WestConnex and the delivery of infrastructure, is given a significant benefit to businesses by shortening the amount of time that people are spending in traffic. But to your specific point, specific point,
Can Mr.
in relation to tolls, to the extent you'll be aware that, and I'm sure you are aware, that we have increased the rebate available to small businesses in relation to government charges to be able to include tolls. So what we anticipate, of course, is that lots of people who engage in
Minister,
businesses which have been using that rat run.
This is 3.5 minutes in to a question that was really about what's this going on with the Bexley Small Business Chamber's appeal to the Small Business Commission in respect to this particular issue.
What I'm saying to you is
the point is well made. I may disagree with it, but you've made it well. Can we hear from Mr. Lamont?
It's underpinned by an opportunity for businesses to be able to
Minister, take the hint. I'm trying to allow Mr. Lamont to get his afternoon back.
He's getting it back now.
So perhaps you can just allow him to give me this update. I can ask him a few more questions and you can decide whether he needs to stay. So.
Mr. Mookie, my office has facilitated discussion between Transport for New South Wales, the Bexley Chamber, and I think businesses who may or may not belong to the Bexley Chamber. I understand that the discussions to date have discussed the plans for the infrastructure concerned, and there was, to my understanding, be an ongoing dialogue. I would need to provide a further update as to what has happened since the last meeting, but we have facilitated discussions between Transport and the Chamber and some of the impacted businesses.
Thank you for the efficiency of your response there, Commissioner. Whilst you're here, Minister, can you tell us when exactly will the New South Wales government complete its review of the faster payment terms policy?
I beg pardon?
When will the government complete the review into the faster payment terms policy?
I'll perhaps pass to Mr. Gardner in relation to that, because I think that's imminent.
No, just be clear. Well, before we get to Mr. Gardner, I might then ask you the next question, which I was going to ask you, Minister, which is who exactly is doing this review?
Yeah, I'll pass to Mr. Gardner.
Okay, and then what exactly is the terms of reference of the review?
Yep, I'll pass to Mr. Gardner.
Do you not know?
Oh, no, well, if you want me to talk about faster payments.
No, you are aware that your government committed to a review?
Absolutely.
Where did the government make that commitment?
Oh, well, I don't specifically know the document.
When did the government make that commitment?
The Minister has every right to pass to one of his public servants.
I'm going to hear from Mr. Gardner, but I'm asking some questions first.
I'll pass to Mr. Gardner, but I'd like to talk about faster payments. You've asked your questions and I'll give you the answer.
No, Minister, just you're too fast to want to get into this.
Faster payments.
But indeed.
Yeah, indeed.
You are aware that your government committed to this last week, yes?
To
a review of the faster payment policy? Are you aware of that?
No, I wasn't specifically aware.
No.
Can I read from you the economic strategy document that was released last week? And let me read it to you, and that might give you some context, right? Like, your government last week said in the economic recovery strategy to make it easier for small businesses to operate, the New South Wales government is committed to a review of the current faster payment terms policy, which ensures that payments by government to small business suppliers is as fast as possible. Now, of course, we support the faster payments policy. It's a good policy. We think you should go harder. But
more than 5 days?
Yes. Can we ask, were you not aware that your government had made that commitment until I just read it to you?
No, I was aware of it.
When did you become aware of it, Minister?
No, I was aware of the discussions around it last week.
Well, yes. Was that when the discussions, were you involved in the discussions?
The short answer to that is no. But can I just say to you, though, that an essential component of the way that government does business is that we have consistently sought to embrace faster payments in terms of the way that we deliver outcomes for small businesses. Now, I think we ought to embrace that as a policy position.
I just did embrace that as a policy position.
Absolutely.
But I'm asking, your government committed to a review of it?
The question is how, and it's always open for us to do better. And one of the initiatives that we have taken is requiring those contractors who do business with the government as a term of their contract to warrant that they will be using faster payments terms in respect of their subcontractors. Now, that's an extension of the existing procurement policy that the government has adopted and that we are currently rolling out. So from going from a period where we initially started with a 21-day faster payments terms, we've now got that down to a 5-day faster payments terms, and we are now extending it further to having the government requiring its contractors to also embrace faster payments.
Are you not trialling that with subcontractors, or are you embracing it?
Trialling it.
So when's the trial wrapping up?
It has, in fact, Mr. Gardner, perhaps you... I'd like Mr. Gardner to give that detail.
I was about to give it, but I was also going to ask whether or not Mr. Lamont is involved in this.
No, the policy started off with the Commission. There have been some changes to the operation of the current program that were made earlier this year. So, Mr. Mookie, at the last estimate session, I advised that there were 9,995 small businesses registered for faster payments, small businesses registered. We've changed the array that businesses can register, so we've included the Supply Hub businesses that have registered, that are small businesses. So we've now got 20,375 businesses. That's a significant change to how the policy was operating previously.
That's good. And
has moved to outside the Commission for the review. So Mr. Gardner, I think, can provide further
Before we do hear from the other question I was going to ask you, Commissioner, when were you first advised that the New South Wales Government was doing this review?
I was involved in discussions probably for the last 2 months about the potential for a review of faster payments.
Were you aware that it was being included in the strategy that was announced last week?
Yes.
Great, thank you. We can hear from Mr. Gardner now.
So the Small Business Commission, the faster payments policy, is a policy of the Small Business Commission. So we have very little, if any, involvement in that. The policy that we have involvement in, I think you're questioning around the trialling, is the shorter payment terms policy, which the Minister referred to as the one that requires suppliers sort of indirectly through their subcontracting enterprises to pay in shorter period as possible. So that pilot was run in the first half of this year. We actually have implemented the policy as of the 1st of July this year, so it's a requirement of...
okay, but that was a separate policy than the one that the Minister was referring to.
Yes, that's a separate policy.
Okay. So, look, don't take this the wrong way, Mr. Gardner, but...
That's a bad start to any question.
It was slightly anticlimactic. I was really looking forward to you being able to provide these details about this review that the government announced last week without telling the Small Business Minister. But Small Business, now we're back to you, given that Mr. Gardner wasn't involved, Minister. Separate policy than the one you just referred to. It's faster payment terms. Your government committed to it. Do you know who's doing this review?
The policy transferred from my office to Buy New South Wales, the Supply Hub. So I suspect they're involved in the review. So.
Who's Buy New South Wales again? Is that Mr. Gardner's group?
No, that's the Department of Customer Service.
Okay.
Victor, I think this is a question that's been taken on notice.
No, they haven't actually taken this on notice. I'm not going to let the Minister off so easily because he is a Small Business Minister and you are the Procurement Minister and it's your policy. You're seriously telling me that you do not know who's doing this review that your government announced last week and nominated this as a part of the economic recovery strategy? Seriously? No one told you.
Seriously asking me that?
Did the email end up in your junk filter?
Listen. Just ask questions to us.
I'm going to ask you the question.
Okay. Well, don't say that. Don't include the pejoratives.
I won't if you want. Minister, let's just do this. Right?
What I'm saying.
Who's reviewing this policy?
To the extent that it is being, there is a combination between faster payments terms and Buy New South Wales, because the way the scheme operates is that for a business to be entitled to the benefits of the faster payments scheme, they need to be registered with Buy New South Wales as a registered business with Buy New South Wales. Now, Buy New South Wales is a Service New South Wales initiative to, in fact, make sure that businesses are registered for the purposes of doing business with New South Wales.
I appreciate that, but the faster payment terms policy, you're the Minister responsible for that policy, aren't you not? The faster payments policy, yes?
Faster payments policy, insofar as that it is a component of the small business component, small business strategy, it is part of my responsibility. but in terms of the oversight, the delivery.
Do you know if By New South Wales is doing the review, or is that your speculation?
Well, it would be my speculation, but because of the synergy which exists between By New South Wales and the delivery of the faster payments terms policy, I would expect that By New South Wales would be doing an analysis of the extent to which people who are entitled to faster
Minister,
payments
can
are
I invite
receiving
you to take on notice the following questions? Who is doing the review? Is it an independent review? What are the review's terms of reference? When is the review meant to be finished? And to whom will the report of the review be given?
I'm happy to take those questions on notice. I don't think. I think what you ought to be doing is embracing the policy, Daniel.
Well, I'm trying to. But you're the one who's reviewing it. I'm trying to figure out what exactly it is I'm embracing. Let's turn to the next one. When is the Event Saver program fund going to be established?
I must say that, as I said,
is this the Small Business Commission involved in this?
Event Saver?
No, the Small Business Commissioner is not involved in this.
It's a Treasury initiative, I thought.
It is. Yeah. It affects a lot of small businesses.
And it does, and I accept that it's a good program, but I think it's probably a combination of Minister Ayres and Treasury that...
Okay, because look, to be fair, we've asked this to other ministers, and we are also struggling to identify the minister with carriage of this particular fund.
Well, let me take that on notice as well.
To the best of your knowledge, you're not the minister. Okay, fair enough. Well, I won't push you too much further on that particular point. Can we turn to... You're the shareholding minister for the Transport Asset Holding Entity?
Yes.
You're one of the two?
One of two.
And what's your involvement as a shareholding minister?
Well, let me read it to you. In fact, I'm surprised that you've asked me that question, but I'm delighted in one sense. But because
you're not really surprised, Minister.
No, I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised because the responsibilities of a shareholding minister are well set out in the state-owned in the Act, and if you look at them, my responsibility is to review 6 monthly business performance reports or receive them. Details of, I have meetings with chairs and CEOs. I review the statements of corporate intent.
And otherwise known as a shareholder agreement?
Yeah.
And you signed that statement of corporate intent / shareholder agreement?
Correct.
And do you recall signing last year's one?
In fact, I think I do recall signing it because I had a meeting, I recall, with the chair at the time. Was it Bruce Morgan?
Yes. Yeah. You want to put the name on the record so we can get that exchange on the record? You recall having a meeting with the chair whose name was?
Bruce Morgan.
Good, great. And you recall signing that statement of corporate intent?
To the best of my recollection, yes.
Did you receive any advice about that statement of corporate intent prior to you signing it?
I do recall, I'd have to check my records, but I'm pretty sure that Treasury did provide an advice in relation to it.
Yes, and as part of that shareholder agreement, amongst other things, are you required to specify either explicitly or implicitly the rate of return on invested assets with that state-owned corporation?
That's one of the things that we would expect to appear in a statement of corporate intent.
Did Treasury give you advice as to the rate of return that they expect to earn for the for-profit transport asset holding entity?
I think that there was a proposal that it be deferred for a period of time, if my memory serves me correctly.
What period of time was? What actually are we talking about? Are we talking about deferral of a return?
Or for I'd have to check that, and I'd check it by reference to the statement of corporate intent and the advice that I would have received from Treasury at the time.
Did you inquire into whether or not the advice that Treasury had given you as shareholding minister about what the appropriate rate of return should be was accurate and appropriate?
One of the things that I think I would have expected Treasury to have done is provide that sort of advice.
Sorry, Minister, I forgot. I'm not necessarily intending to ask any further questions of Mr. Lamont, so it's your discretion. So fine, just giving you an option. Yes. So do you recall what precisely Treasury recommended should be the rate of return?
As I sit here right now, I don't remember.
Did they advise you that you should agree to a 1 to 3% rate of return on the capital equity contribution of taxpayers to the transport asset holding entity?
Well, I don't, if that appears in the statement of corporate
doesn't.
I'm sorry?
Doesn't. Hence, I'm asking you the question.
Well, if it doesn't, it doesn't.
No, that's not the question. The question is
do I recall the terms of the Treasury?
Did the advice that they give you...
I don't recall.
Specify. Will you take that on notice?
As to...
Whether or not Treasury advised you to agree to a rate of return of 1 to 3%.
I'll take that on notice.
Thank you. Do you know what the average is for all state-owned corporations for which you are a shareholder agreement?
No.
Is it 6 to 7%?
You're telling me, I don't know, and I haven't just answered your previous question.
No, I'm not telling you, I'm asking you. Is it 6 to 7%?
The answer is I don't know.
Can you take that on notice?
Happy to.
Thank you. Is it the case that Treasury recommended that you agree to a rate of return that was half what other state-owned corporations for which you are a shareholder agreement?
Are you putting that to me,
yes,
or are you asking?
I'm putting it to you.
Well,
did Treasury advise you to agree to a rate of return from the transport asset holding entity that was half of what other state-owned corporations?
By virtue of the fact that I said I'm taking the previous question on notice, it gives some
can
sort of...
Can you take that on notice?
Well, yeah, but it was an unnecessary question because I can't... if I couldn't answer the previous one, if I couldn't answer the previous question, I can't answer that one.
Well, you can't answer that one unless I ask you it, and you can't take it on notice unless it's asked.
Well,
so I'm glad we've established that. So I asked you, you took it on notice. Let's just move on, why don't we?
Yep, let's move on.
Yeah, that's good. What inquiries did you make? Did you make any inquiries about what the appropriate rate of return should be from the transport asset holding entity over what period of time?
Well, specific. Well, I can say this. I think that that there is a statement by the Treasury Secretary in relation to TAHE, which gives me some confidence in relation to how it operates as an entity. I think it is one of the really impressive things about this organisation is the quality of the people that are involved in the running of that organisation. And I made reference earlier to Bruce Morgan. I have to say Bruce Morgan probably is one of the preeminent chairs that we have.
Who's the CEO of the transport asset holding entity?
Benedict Colin.
And were you involved in her appointment?
I was.
What was your involvement?
Well, I have met with her, I've interviewed her, and I've reviewed the documentation in support of her appointment.
You interviewed her?
I didn't interview her for the job, no.
Oh, okay, sorry, I thought you said that.
No. I have met with her.
Returning to the shareholder agreement, do you know how much dividends TAHE is expected to pay?
I have this recollection, and I'll take it on notice, but I have this recollection that it was deferred for a period of time.
You're correct. It's zero for the next 3 years.
Yeah.
Why is this organisation not paying us any dividends?
Well, I think there's a period of time when it as an organisation will bed itself down before it can make a return to government.
Does this organisation... Does this organisation...
I think the true answer to that question is that Treasury would have provided advice about the manner in which the organisation ought to be treated for the purposes of assessing whether it ought to be making returns.
Yes, now, I'm sure they have.
I don't personally make that assessment.
No. But you are, well, Minister, you act on advice, don't you?
I do.
But you act. You are the shareholding minister, yes? You're one of two.
I'm one of two.
That's correct. So you're our shareholder, correct?
I am the shareholding minister for the state-owned corporation known as TAHE, yes.
Thank you. So you gave your agreement to this organisation to pay no dividends for the next 3 years, correct?
Yep.
Did you do that on the basis of Treasury advice? Is that what you're trying to say?
Well, at last you've come to the point.
Yes.
You answer the question, Minister.
Well, the answer is I agree with you.
So, are you aware that this organisation has control of 15% of New South Wales' net assets?
Well, I don't know where you get that figure from, but...
well, I'll put it to you. Does this organisation have control of 15% of New South Wales' net worth?
No one has ever put that to me, that that's the value of the asset holding of TAHE.
You're aware that they have $40 billion worth of assets?
Well, I'm unaware of how that valuation point has been arrived at.
Aware that that's listed in the annual report.
The rail asset rolling stock, the railway.
It's publicly available.
Real property.
Sure.
Yeah.
The minister is constantly interrupted. He starts to respond and he isn't able to complete his response. Can we just pause and enable him to do that?
Look, to be fair, I think it's both ways. So I will remind everyone here that we need one person to speak at a time, question followed by an answer, particularly for the Hansard, but also so that we can just get this done.
Let me just reset the question.
Madam Chair, with respect, I have to say that there is a manner in which people do ask questions which does not allow for the appropriate delivery of an answer. But in any event,
I will ensure that you're able to deliver your answer, but you cannot take a point of order. So the questions will come from the committee to you.
Can't canvass the chair's ruling either.
But to that point, he hasn't completed his
Look, let me just reset the questions for you.
Thank you.
Are you aware that the Transport Asset Holding Entity annual reports disclose this is an organisation that controls 38 at that time $1 billion worth of assets?
Well,
yes,
if that's what the annual report says. That's a very good indication of what it holds.
Are you aware, therefore, that it is an organisation that is the size of Telstra in terms of the assets that it controls?
But you make that statement. Okay, that's fine.
Okay, but then why isn't it paying us dividends for the next 3 years?
Well,
why did you agree to that?
Well, what I would say to you is that I think that in terms of the position that I would take in respect of the deferral of a payment of dividends, that is a matter which would be assessed by Treasury. It would be on the basis of a submission made by the board of that organisation. I am disposed to accept the advice which Treasury provides and which the board makes application for in relation to its representations to Treasury.
Have you agreed to any other exemptions for the Transport Asset Holding Entity in respect to any tax that you are responsible for collecting?
That's a really broad question. If you have a specific question about a particular tax, put that.
I will.
Do
you recall providing any exemption?
Put a specific question about a specific tax.
You're aware that under the...
It gives me an opportunity to answer it properly.
Are you aware that as a state-owned corporation, TAHE is responsive to the commercial policy framework set by Treasury?
Yes.
And are you aware that under that policy, TAHE has the right to seek exemptions from certain requirements?
Would.
Are you aware that TAHE made an application to seek an exemption from land tax?
The short answer to that is no. Do you have any?
Mr Gardner might be in a position to assist
So it's the Treasurer that's responsible for the administration of tax
Mr
policy.
Gardner is responsible for state-owned corporations, is he not?
I am, but I was unaware of that request.
Okay. Are you aware that that request was agreed to by the government?
Well, if Mr Gardner is unaware of it, I certainly am unaware of. I don't recall seeing anything in terms of application for an exemption or payment of land tax.
Do you recall receiving?
Maybe that's a.
Do you recall receiving a brief from Treasury that you signed on the 29th of June 2020, in which TAHE sought exemptions from the commercial policy framework?
I get lots of briefs, Mr Mookie. To ask me if I recall a specific brief about a specific policy position, that's an unreasonable position. If you want to put a copy of a brief in front of me that I have signed,
firstly,
do that, and I will confirm.
Careful what you wish for, because that's entirely possible that we will.
That's the appropriate way to do it.
Okay.
Not to try.
TAHE has said at the inquiry at the Public Accountability Committee that it sought and received an exemption from certain parts of the Treasury commercial policy framework, which included an exemption for land tax. Are you aware of that?
That evidence already?
Well, you're the one who gave the consent, hence I'm here asking you.
Well,
and to be fair, the other shareholding minister, who at the time was Treasurer Perrottet, also gave his consent as well. Do you know what the value of that concession was?
It may well have been included in the brief. I don't know the answer to that as I sit here now.
Is it, and you might need to take this on notice, is it $162 million exemption from land tax?
Well, I will take it on notice.
Thank you. Does Mr Gardner have any insight into this?
Well,
I have no insight into this, Mr Mookie.
Is it the case that that TAHE made that application as a continuance of an exemption that was given to Railcorp?
Well, and that would be an entirely reasonable expectation if there already was a continuing exemption given to Railcorp and the asset had been transferred to TAHE. That would be an explanation. But
well, that was their explanation.
Mr Mookie,
go ahead.
You've conducted an inquiry in relation to this. The relevant people you've had an opportunity. You've had Treasury officials. You've had TAHE people. Have you asked them these questions?
I'm asking the minister.
Have you asked them these questions?
I have, actually. I'm asking the minister who is responsible for A, land tax, and B, the transport asset holding entity as a shareholder agreement. You've got both responsibilities, and I could be mean and ask you how you're balancing that conflict of interest, but I'm not. Let me just continue with the questions.
But it was a continuing exemption, as
yes, but
rightly
clearly
identified.
You may not have as much awareness of that as I do.
Yep.
The question, though, is this. You're aware that Railcorp was not a state-owned corporation?
Yep.
You're aware, therefore, that Railcorp did have no responsibility of providing a profit result to taxpayers?
Well, the nature of state-owned corporations are that they do have obligations to.
Therefore,
so that's the nature of it,
and that's why it's different about you providing the same concession to the transport asset holding entity that Railcorp have. Were you ever advised about whether or not it was appropriate to grant that exemption to a corporation that its responsibility is to return a profit to taxpayers?
I am sure that there would have been advice provided by Treasury in relation to that aspect.
From who in Treasury?
Oh, as I said to you, I don't recall. Mr Gardner doesn't know. There would have been a Treasury advice or a brief, as you identified.
You're aware
that
to me. Under the tax equivalency regime that Treasury applies for-profit corporations, that it cannot treat them any separately to any corporation in the private sector. Are you aware of that?
Well, specifically in those terms, yes, I understand that.
Designed to keep competitive neutrality between government-owned enterprises and private sector enterprises. Are you aware of that?
Yes.
And that's been a policy that's been in place.
That's the nature of state-owned corporations.
Well, it's also been a policy that's been in place since the 1995 National Competition Agreement. So, is it appropriate to provide this exemption to a for-profit government business enterprise? And does that breach the policy around tax equivalency as it applies between private and government business enterprises?
I think that's an appropriate question for me to take on notice and get advice in relation to, because I don't have the advice in front of me. You obviously have a view, Mr Mookie. I'm sure.
I have inquiries, to be fair. I'm actually open to an argument on this point.
Well, let's not have an argument, but I have to say that the nature of this organisation, I am satisfied, is that it is an organisation which will, in fact, be effective for the purposes of owning and delivering outcomes for rail assets.
I've got some questions, Minister. You'd be thrilled. Minister, I want to talk to you about small businesses, and in particular small businesses in the taxi industry. The 2015 re-regulation of point-to-point transfer sector obviously has led to significant changes in relation to the value of taxi licence plates. Do you believe the New South Wales Government should provide taxi licence plate holders full compensation for the loss in the value of their taxi plates?
Well, it's probably a better question for Transport to administer that policy. But
well, I'm asking you as the Minister for Small Business.
I get that, and I get the assumption that you rely on that taxi owners are small businesses. But the question about what is full compensation, how do you assess compensation, is a difficult policy position, and that's why Transport have responsibility for it, because they collect that fund and are obliged to distribute that fund as a compensation for the advent of disruptive industries. to the extent that I am the Small Business Minister, I have significant interest in making sure that taxi drivers who have been impacted by the disruptive industry caused by Uber are properly acknowledged and properly catered for. Can I just say this? One of the things in relation to the taxi industry, which I think we don't give nearly enough credit for, is the way that they have responded to the advent of Uber and the way that there has been this liberalisation of transport services, because the extent to which taxis have now got involved in the food delivery business, the extent to which, and I'll give you this example.
Minister, I'm going to let you go for a little while, but not too long.
Okay, well, no, but I
am interested.
It really is.
You can ask questions in half an hour.
I can remember many years ago when you get into a taxi and it'd have a radio, and the customer relationship was not at what I would have called the forefront of the service which they provided. I caught a cab recently. The cab was beautifully appointed. There was a bottle of water for me, and in fact, I came back and
that was your ministerial car.
Not your driver.
That was your driver.
but I came back when the taxi driver dropped me off. He asked me, "Can I come back and pick you up?" Now, I have to tell you that the nature of this is that we have changed the cab industry significantly over a period of time. Now, it is a small business. It has pivoted well to deal with the competition in that industry.
There's been massive loss in the value of their taxi plates,
and I agree with that.
Less than
I
thrilled.
agree with that, and I have to say that to the extent that I'm an advocate for making sure that taxi drivers get a fair deal, they have my support.
Have you spoken to the Transport Minister about this issue?
Not recently. I've met with the Taxi Council, but...
no, if you raised it with the Transport Minister, given you just pointed it to him...
specifically, I don't recall a specific representation I have. Have you ever received any representations? No.
Yeah, okay. Minister, do you support the ongoing retention of the point-to-point transport levy as a revenue stream to finance the package of compensation to taxi operators?
To the extent that it is a tool which can provide compensation to the taxi industry, I think it's a policy consideration worth supporting. But I'm not responsible for articulating policy on behalf of Transport for New South Wales.
No, I'm well aware of that, Minister. But I'm asking you as a small business minister whether you have a view.
I might have a personal view in relation to it, where I would be happy to support it because the taxi drivers do have my support in terms of the business that they run.
There's been some suggestion that that the compensation to taxi licence holders could be categorised as capital payment rather than a revenue payment. Do you have a view about that?
They're generally matters of tax advice, which I don't have a view, is the short answer.
Minister, let's go back to, I just want to get an update as to where we actually are. This might be Mr Gardner. I think last time I had this, Mr Gardner was in a position to provide this information. So, but you should feel free to have a stab at it if you wish.
Well, to the extent that it involves articulating great government policy, I'm always happy to have a stab to it.
Indeed, even when it doesn't involve articulating government policy.
You're
happy to take a stab, I'm sure. Minister, I want to update on the faster payments policy by cluster as to where we are tracking in terms of the targets. I wanted to know where we're up to in terms of the target for invoices paid within 5 days.
I think we do have some of that information here.
I'm shocked. I know Mr Gardner comes prepared and he had this information last time. Yep. So if he has it, otherwise if someone else has it, I'm happy to, whoever has it.
I'm getting it from all directions.
Can we table it or not?
I'll just read it out to you so that I can take up some of your time.
Can we get the customer service number, please? The customer service cluster, invoices paid within 5 days.
Customer service, the very top one, 98.5% are paid within 20 days, paid within 5 days, 96.7%.
96.7. Education,
paid within 5 business days, 96.3.
Sorry, are we talking about on the credit card, or we're talking about the other invoices? Which category are we talking about?
I'm just talking about paid within 5 business days, 96.
Mr. Gardner used to have these numbers broken down by P card and
got P card as well.
But you used to have them as 2 separate categories.
Yeah, I think you may be recalling someone else, Mr. Wilkie. This is never an area where I've...
Miss Wilkie, it would have been Miss Wilkie who had that information. I don't want, no disrespect to Miss Wilkie, she was very good at it. So do you have that broken down by how many, what's the percentage that is paid by P card?
In relation, let me just say this to you. Whether it's paid by P card or whether it's paid by the agency directly, it is paid within that period of time.
Minister, you have a target to increase the number that's paid by P card. That's why I'm asking you.
Well, the amount that's
your
paid
policy,
by P card,
right?
paid by P card. Listen, someone else ought to identify
That's what we were suggesting. Maybe can we hand it back to the professionals, Minister?
Yeah, okay, well, I'm happy to hand it back to the professionals.
Thank you. Welcome back, Mr. Gadiel. Would you like to table it, Mr. Gadiel, and make this a lot faster for everybody?
So I'm happy to read it out.
It's a good document.
You should share it with us, Minister.
We'll read it.
So,
can you table it, or provide it to us on notice?
So we can provide the data on notice if that's...
No, we'll read it now. Let's take it to both.
Good. Yeah.
So, so we have performance, so P card usage, is that what you're looking for?
Let's go through it step by step.
Yep.
Let's go through the overall within 5 days by cluster, which the Minister was helpfully starting, 96.7 for customer service, 96.3 for education. Where are we at health?
So for health, we're at 79.1 and P card usage is at 46.8.
Yep. And for planning and industry?
Planning and industry is at 98% and P card usage is at 97.2%.
Yep. And where are we at for Premier and Cabinet?
Premier and Cabinet is 97.1% and P card usage is at 96.5%.
Great. And
Stronger Communities is at 94.6% and P card usage is at 92.1%.
Yep.
Transport 99.2%.
Yep.
And P card usage is at 98.3%.
And Treasury?
Treasury, paid within 5 business days, is at 99% and P card usage is at 98.5%. So you're missing 2 numbers, the first 2, and that was the P card usage. So going back to customer, P card usage is at 96.4%.
Yep.
And education P card usage is at 94.8%.
Got it. Thank you. And
so I can give you the total.
Yep.
So the total across clusters is paid within 5 days is 96.4%. And P card usage is at 93.9%.
Let's just be clear, what invoice level are we talking about with all those numbers? What's the criteria that we're using? Is that for all invoices or?
I believe it is, yes. Okay. For all invoices that are within this.
The Minister, this, look, I think this, forgive me, I'm going off memory here, Minister and or Mr. Gadiel. My recall is that health had it at 73% last time we asked these questions. And that really is off my memory. It's now up to 79. Health has been the laggard. I think the reason it was given prior was because of the LHD structure that was in place, which makes it a little bit more complicated for health.
Yep.
What specific engagement have you and or Treasury had with health about this? Accepting, of course, the fact that health obviously has had a lot to do in the last year.
Bill, have you got any input in relation to that issue?
Usually Mr. Wilkie, I think, but, or is it Mr.
Well, actually, Mr. Mookie, I recall the number of 75.7 at the last session of health. And we discussed at the last estimate session me writing to agencies, which I've done, and we had a number of responses, including from health. So it's pleasing to see the number has picked up. There was also an issue, as you say, around the local health agencies actually not reporting in the same way in terms of faster payments. These numbers, as I understand, still exclude, so the number could be even higher from health if we allow it. So, sorry, that's right. But there has been a substantial increase in the I guess pick up in the 5-day payment terms.
Look, again, I accept the health is complicated, but they also have a lot of suppliers. Like, it's a huge part of how we supply. And both the Minister and I have been ambushed in public events by health businesses that...
Correct. I remember one.
Yeah, same. Hence, I'm asking, what are we doing to given that a lot of those businesses have used their balance sheets and credit facilities to support the state's health response? Like, what program have we got to get health up, given that there's a 20-point spread between them and everybody else?
Well, my office will continue to meet with health. I said we've written to them, we have met with them. We'll continue to monitor the numbers, Mr. Mookie, as you say. It is a key issue. Payment terms are a key issue for small business. So we'll keep monitoring these numbers and work with the agencies and remind them of the commitment to this policy.
Certainly don't doubt your commitment or efforts, Mr. Lamont, in this respect, but I feel like this requires the intervention of the Minister here. Minister, have you had any conversations with your health counterparts about this?
No, but on the basis of the discussions today, I undertake to do so, Mr. Mookie.
And you know I will hold you to that, won't you?
I know you will.
Because both of us will get ambushed again.
I think we're back in March next year, and you can ask me again.
Oh, it might be sooner. Are we back in March next year?
We are.
You are going to be here?
Oh, sorry, I haven't told you yet. Penny knows.
Excellent. Noted.
Very good. Let's go on to, I want to ask you some questions about the State Revenue Legislation Further Amendment Bill 2019, which I know is dear to the heart of Revenue New South Wales.
Yes.
Did Revenue New South Wales advise individuals that discretionary trusts may be liable for surcharge land and purchaser duties without an amendment to their trust deeds?
Did they advise?
Individuals,
yes,
discretionary trusts.
Yep.
Can't help notice they disappeared right now.
Yeah, that's okay.
They're back.
Did they advise, or
let me finish the question now that they are back, because I feel, Minister, you might need to refer this to them.
Well, I'm interested.
You'll give it a go.
Have a stab. Did Revenue New South Wales advise individuals that discretionary trusts may be liable for surcharge land and purchaser duties without an amendment to their trust deeds?
I'm pretty sure not, but I will in fact now pass to Revenue to ask whether they were in fact providing that advice, and I could be corrected. Mr. Smythe, was that advice provided?
So there was a great deal of consultation over an extended period of time, principally through a large number of representative groups, the Law Society, the Tax Institute, combined liaison meetings with the Institute of Chartered Accountants and Certified Practicing Accountants and various others. There was information on our website. Whether or not every individual was made aware of the implications of the legislation, I couldn't possibly say.
No, Cullen, I think the question, can I make sure that I understand, was advice given by Revenue that individuals may not be liable?
Let me just repeat the question.
Yeah.
Did Revenue New South Wales advise individuals that discretionary trusts may be liable for surcharge land and purchaser duties without an amendment to their trust deeds? Which I think you'll understand that piece of legislation contained a period in which...
In fact, I thought everyone was advised about the necessity of amending their trust deeds, but to the extent that I'm hearing...
Sorry, Minister.
Yeah, go.
We wrote to all discretionary trusts of which we were
aware of. Yeah.
And that we could identify that might be liable.
Yes, and did you track how many of them, in fact, did amend their deeds to avoid the surcharge duty? We're talking, let's be specific here, about Australian residents.
I think I'd have to take that on notice, but we do have that information where people made amendments.
Great. Did Revenue New South Wales have an approval process for well,
revenue even gave pro formas about how the deeds ought to be.
Yeah, this is why I'm asking you. So it's not critical. Like I'm just trying to get the update.
There was a process which I thought, and there was, Cullen, I might be again wrong, but I thought you extended the period for Trust to actually make the amendment because there was some industry bodies who were saying they haven't had enough time, and you actually extended it.
That's correct, Minister. The legislation, there was also a delay between when the legislation was introduced and when it was finally...
We had to amend it, Darryl. Yes, indeed. So how many trusts are now liable for surcharge land duty as a result of them not amending their trust deeds?
I think that might be one that we need to take on notice.
At the time...
One of the difficulties is that the surcharge provisions apply only to residential properties, not all commercial properties.
Yes, that's true. So do you have the information or you'll take that on notice?
Take that on notice.
Great. Can we talk now about how many amounts have been collected from extra surcharge duty? I think at the time we were expecting 30 odd million to be coming in.
I had a figure of about 90 million, was it?
I think that specific change was 30, but to be fair, it's your legislation.
40.
So this one's, yes. So you might recall there's two classes of surcharge that apply. One is surcharge land tax, and the other is surcharge purchaser duty or surcharge stamp duty. I have numbers broken down by year up to 30 September 2021.
Look, you can give it to us on notice if you want, and we can. I know this is of real interest to everybody here. So if we can, but I'll save my excitement for 21 days on these numbers. Okay, that's easy for everybody. Minister, that would be good. I wanted to just now. I think there's only two matters that I have left, and then I'm done. In that, I wanted to get an update as to where we are in terms of the electric vehicle fleet numbers by department and target.
Great policy.
Can we just let Mr. Gardner give us the numbers, Minister?
No.
Mr. Gardner can tell us how good it is.
In fact, I think that you probably should ask Mr. Poulos. I'm sure he's across all that detail. Mr. Gardner, do you want to talk about electric vehicles?
I can. I'm just pulling up my dashboard. We have about 3,000 electric vehicles across the fleet now. I just need to pull up something to actually get the fleet by agency. So just pulling it up for me. So by EV, we actually mean it can be true battery electric vehicles or hybrids. And so the number I give you is a combination of battery electric vehicles and hybrid vehicles.
But I think previously you had been able to break it down by both categories, weren't you?
Yeah, I can. I will probably be able to give you a pure EV breakdown as well. So we have 3,051 EVs/hybrids across the fleet, of which 1,400, these are rough numbers, but 1,400 with health, 660 with stronger communities, 325 with education, 227 with transport, planning industry 102, customer service 97, regional is 47, and Premier and Cabinet is 15. And I'm just seeing if the team can check with me if there's a number on pure.
Did you give the Treasury number there, Mr. Gardner?
The Treasury number on hybrids is 0.
Where are all your hybrids?
The Treasurer drives an electric vehicle.
One vehicle, actually.
Yeah, the Treasurer drives.
Treasurer does.
The new treasurer, not the old treasurer.
Right.
Just to be clear.
So the new treasurer ain't driving a hybrid.
No, I think it's electric, isn't it?
No, the new treasurer apparently, well, I've seen in the press, has a
It's the new treasurer, not the
Yeah,
premier.
but he owns it.
Indeed.
You don't own it, do you?
I can't assure that piece of information.
How much? Well, have we bought an EV for the new treasurer? That's the first question. Or is he using his own?
I'm not aware that we have bought any vehicles for the treasurer.
Okay, fair enough. What's the targets for next year, which you may wish to put on notice? How many are we acquiring in each of the next 3 years?
We don't have specific targets for each of the next 3 years. We've got a interim target of 50% of our vehicle procurement in the light and commercial vehicles by 2026, and then 100% by 2031.
Okay. Do you wish to wax lyrical now about your EV policy, Minister, or can we move on?
Well, I just know that you're loving it, so the EV policy is
I said I'd give you the opportunity.
No, well, no.
Can we get an update as to where we are in terms of the Indigenous procurement target, please, by department?
We can do that.
They're all good news figures, let me tell you.
Well, it's taken a while.
So you'll...
Well, but accept that they're good news figures because...
Well, let's just get the figures and then you and I can have our fight about them.
There are really important steps which have been taken in relation to...
after we lowered the target. Let's go.
No. We'll come to that. Let's go, Mr. Gardner.
So the overall... so you recall the targets were allocated per cluster from 1st of January 2021. And we had a target for the first 6 months of the year at the whole government level of $59.337 million.
Which is, just to be clear, not 3% of the total spend, correct?
No, that's 1% of addressable spend.
Yes, thank you. How are we going?
The number that was achieved was 100.426 million.
Yep.
And I'll have to take the agency breakdowns for you. We'll be publishing, that's got to go through a government cabinet process in the next 2 or 3 weeks, I think, and then we'll be publishing those on an agency-specific basis.
Thank you. So can you take that on notice? Because I think we'll probably get them within 21 days then.
I think it's...
Maybe take 30 days on that one.
Yeah, well.
Yeah. Minister, you revised down the target from 3% of addressable spend to 1% of addressable spend. Are you going to now uplift the target back to the 3% that you never reached?
Well, I'm glad you appreciate the fact that the government has in fact made significant gains in relation to this policy, but I think one of the important things that we've done is made individual agencies responsible for meeting their targets rather than having an overall government procurement spend. We have, as Mr. Gardner correctly identified, from the 1st of January this year, was it? 1st of January?
That's correct.
And it's now included as...
There's never a 3% target in terms of dollar value. There's a 3% target of the number of contracts, which is similarly, I can give the statistics around that as well, which has been exceeded over that time frame.
Okay.
Oh, that's a difference, isn't it?
Well, I'm glad that Mr. Gardner came to your rescue here, Minister.
Well, no, but it came to your rescue because you, in fact,
if we can
got
compete,
it wrong.
Minister, if both sides of politics can compete about how we can support Indigenous businesses,
Yeah,
it's a good
absolutely.
competition.
Absolutely.
Let me just go on to perhaps what could be the final question, depending on how you wish to answer it. Actually, no, final 2 questions. Sorry, Mr. Gadiel, I don't think we got the statistics on the same level on the micro business grants. If you've got them, that would be good. And then I'm going to ask my final question to the Minister. If he...
Was this in relationship to the hardship review panel?
No. This is the micro grants, the $75,000.
So specifically, what were you looking for?
Just the number of applicants, amount dispersed, the general figures across the grant program.
So for the micro business grant,
yes,
there have been 82,199 applications received as of 26th of October.
Yeah.
Of that, 63,836 Metro, 18,293.
So how much was Metro?
63,836.
Yep.
Regional, 18,293.
Yep.
So that's a 78/22% split. Broadly consistent. So paid, we have a total of 59,325 grants. Metro, we have 46,454, 78% of the total. Regional, 12,827, 22% of the total.
Value figure?
The value figure, total paid out so far, 620 million.
Yep.
Metro, 490 million, or 85%. Regional, 130 million, or 15%.
And do you have LGAs? Which you can table if you so wish.
Yeah, I've got the LGA splits here. I actually think it was contained within the document that I previously tabled and copied.
Thank you very much.
So you would have that, or you will.
Thank you very much.
And you'd have to appreciate, Mr. Mookie, that of course that was a grant which no other jurisdiction in Australia made available to businesses. And
I do appreciate that, Minister, and you have to appreciate that is a grant that we also call for. So, good for us.
It's good that you call for it after we deliver it, but anyway.
That's part of what being in opposition is. I'm trying to get you out of here.
Yeah, it's all right.
Let's not be unduly provocative here and historically wrong. And can we get to now I think which will be my final question. How are we going in terms of you keeping your election promise to reduce the number of state senior executives across the public sector?
Well, COVID, of course, perhaps I ought to refer to Mr Gardner in relation to that, but I think COVID certainly created a circumstance where there were put a bit of a dent in that. Phil, have you got information in relation to that?
I don't have a whole of government senior executive statistic, Minister. But Mr Mookie, while I have the microphone, we have 46 battery electric vehicles across the government fleet. I cannot give you a breakdown by agency.
Thank you. Sorry, Minister, had you concluded your other answer?
I've concluded.
Are you doing anything to keep that promise or not?
I keep all my promises.
Indeed. That's it for me.
There is now time for the government to ask any questions if they wish.
Thank you, Chair. The government rests for the day.
Thank you. Thank you, Minister, for your attendance today. We're finished with your questions. Thank you also to the officials who were here today.
Thank you, everybody.
The Secretariat will be in touch in relation to questions that were taken on notice and any supplementary questions. We're done.
Thank you, everybody.
The committee to stick around.